Andrew was an ordinary teenager who, like all his peers, loved to spend time playing games. This could be called a good pastime, and finding a source of strength to enter the sad process of studying at school. Some battles were really fierce and made you feel like real heroes. But if you might have thought that Andrew held a leading role in the group, you would be mistaken. The guy was an ordinary hillbilly, who moreover did not do his job well according to those around him. He was too weak to directly engage in fights. The most popular game among young people today was Ergosphere Online. It was a large-scale VR quest where players could develop comprehensively. Each participant chose roles that suited their character or mood. Knights and wizards, they could build the world around them the way they wanted to see it in reality, and also to develop those qualities in oneself that could help with life in modern society. 20 million users appreciated all the advantages of the virtual world. Only Andrew was tormented by his inability to please others. The guy was so depressed and insecure that he was always late in applying his skills. And this time, while getting scolded by the team members, he tripped and fell to the ground. It was necessary to hurry and save the fighters. But the young man was not as agile as the dragon turned out to be. Before the eyes of the shocked Hiller, all those who remained capable of resisting were eliminated one by one. The flames literally wiped them off the face of the earth, and somewhere deep down, Andrew was glad of it. The team captain, who is used to winning victories through someone else's hands, he was also alive and watching what was happening from the sidelines. The mission was failed once again, although it seemed that this time they would succeed. After the fate of the mission was finally decided, there was a need to vent anger on someone. Of course, there was no one better than Andrew for this role. The cat, who was hanging over the boy's mountain, shouted that everything had happened exactly like that because of his clumsiness. Hiller, in his usual manner, began to make excuses. But this was not enough for the sadist. He resorted to kicking. Only the leader's reaction stopped the overgrown hooligan. David noticed that all of Keith's efforts were in vain. They were all in the game. To inflict maximum damage on Andrew, it was necessary to beat him in the real world. The team agreed to punish the bully tomorrow at school, and in addition to physical executions, David decided to burden the young man with another task. As a response to the player healing error, Andrew had to prepare 600 high-quality potions by the evening of the next day. The hooligans were not concerned about the high cost or the lack of time to complete this task. No one took Hiller's objections into account, and the guy's existence was forgotten. So Andrew was left alone with problems that fell on him like a snowball. The schoolboy understood. If he didn't do what he was ordered to do, tomorrow he wouldn't be allowed to live at all. With this avatar, the guy had no chance of fulfilling such a gigantic order. Fear for my own life made it impossible to concentrate properly. But no matter how much he liked what was happening, he, like those around him, blamed only himself for it. After spending some time digging around, Andrew turned to the system. He wanted to leave this world and immerse himself in an alternate reality with another character. There he was no longer a healer and did not depend on anyone else. Andrew in the alternative world was an Avenger and had pretty good, to put it mildly, performance. To quickly earn resources to create an order, it was necessary to draw up a detailed action plan. In the end, the schoolboy decided to complete a mission in one of the high-class dungeons. It was called the Red Abyss and at the moment was not free. The moment Andrew crossed his threshold, the local boss was destroying the team of his predecessors. Despite the fact that their cast was quite good, the players underestimated the monster's strength. With one blow, the monster managed to destroy 2 members of the squad at once. This began to spread panic among the remaining young men and women. Suddenly, one of the fastest decided to use his skill to draw attention to himself. He was counting on the backup of one of the posses who fortunately possessed the gift of resurrection. But it didn't happen as expected. The monster turned out to be more agile and noticed the boy right at the start. Therefore, death was threatened if a stranger had not unexpectedly intervened in the fight. Shocked, the players didn't know how to react. Even though it was a violation, the unknown person saved their lives. Andrew seemed to have no problem resisting the giant and even harming him. In the end, after a few seconds of face-to-face combat, the schoolboy managed to cut off the monster's most valuable thing. The giant's horn fell to the ground and he became even angrier. The players could only watch the extraordinary skill unfolding before their eyes. In their opinion, only a representative of a guild from the Asian North could behave like this. Enraged by such extraordinary resistance, the monster decided to activate its superpower. This indicated that the battle was approaching its logical conclusion. The monster attacked Andrew with the fire of God! It was an incredibly powerful blow, and at first it was unclear whether the person was okay. But it turned out that the unknown boy was not so helpless. The young man withstood the pressure on himself with extraordinary resilience, thanks to his well-developed skills. Realizing that you can combine several of your own superpowers for an advantage in battle, Andrew counterattacked the dungeon boss with the power of a dead pavan. The blow proved fatal. The more the monster resisted, the more it disintegrated into molecules. In the end, all that was left of the dungeon boss were artifacts and treasures. The winner was immediately approached by a group of players who remained alive. They wanted to thank him for their salvation, but the lonely man apologized for interfering, getting ahead of them. He asked if he could count on one of the rewards as a result of defeating the boss. He wanted to take the horn he had cut off. It could be sold and get money to make a potion. While technical issues were being resolved, the team members consulted and decided to invite the warrior to join their team. But he honestly answered that he was unable to do this because he had a lack of time due to school. Andrew hurried to say goodbye. He hated long conversations. But the interlocutors decided that this happened only because of their weakness. The young man still had a lot to accomplish before the end of the day, which was rapidly passing. Household chores couldn't wait. Therefore, the schoolboy quickly returned to real life. He left the game with thoughts that had nothing to do with her at all. But suddenly something strange happened. The system asked if Andrew really wanted to leave this hero's world. He even froze in surprise. After the first question, a second one appeared, as if the game was having some kind of dialogue with him. The schoolboy decided that it was some kind of bug and postponed finding out the truth until better times. Within a minute, the session was over and Andrew was in his room. It was only when he took off his helmet that he realized how exhausting the game had been. Taking a shower has now been added to the list of must-do things. But no sooner had Andrew left the room than his helmet emitted a strange signal, after which the young man's body became somewhat amorphous. The schoolboy initially thought it was eye fatigue, but everything turned out to be much more serious. Gradually, Andrew's body began to defragment. There was nothing that could be done about it, but the horror did not diminish. Before his own eyes, the young man was losing one limb after another. All this time, some kind of diagnostics and biometric verification was taking place in the helmet, and when the transformation process was complete, Andrew could not recognize his body at all. He grew 2 heads and gained a strong physique. When he approached the mirror, the schoolboy did not even recognize his own face. The Avenger was looking at him from there. This metamorphosis caused nausea in the impressionable boy. He didn't understand what had happened and was even more worried about the reaction of others. Another signal from the helmet announced the beginning of another process. The equipment established synchronization between reality and the game, upon completion of which the beginning of the training process for the hero was announced. Andrew didn't have time to figure out what was happening, because a moment later he found himself outside. Looking around, the schoolboy saw that he was standing on the roof of a building in another area. Life was bubbling beneath his feet. The unexpected teleportation was not the crowning glory of strange events, because a moment later, one of the game's monsters appeared next to the young man. There he was, called the Black Monster, and being in the real world, he seemed much scarier. Something had to be done urgently because this creature was not in the mood for jokes. The Black Monster rushed forward with an absolute desire to devour the man. From surprise, Andrew did not have time to react and fell from the roof of the building. The young man flew down, realizing that such a fall could not be survived without consequences. But to his surprise, a minute later he was lying on the ground, completely unharmed. Because of this, Andrew began to think that he was in a dream world. But the conversation between 2 people standing nearby made the schoolboy doubt this. They were genuinely surprised by the destruction of the building and did not understand the reasons why this could have happened. This never happened in the game, so what Andrew saw was the real world. Then the whole situation seemed even more incomprehensible to him. The Black Monster was already flying down the mountain towards the young man, distracting him from unnecessary thoughts. The schoolboy barely managed to dodge another blow, but the jump to the side turned out to be very unsuccessful, on the verge of injury. Andrew's only desire was to escape. Years of bullying by classmates had taken their toll. Next to him, the young man saw another group of passers-by. He rushed towards them, trying to save them from a terrible fate. But it was all in vain. No one noticed the frightened boy. It was only when Andrew touched the stranger's shoulder with his hand that he felt something strange. This scared the man incredibly. It seemed like someone's ghost was next to him. The schoolboy realized that the problem with the Black Monster needed to be solved without the intervention of others. But he had no desire to do it. He absolutely did not believe in his own strength. The monster meanwhile prepared for another attack. He fired a shot in the direction of the people, and a moment later, a powerful explosion rang out. Andrew was thrown aside. The schoolboy barely had time to regroup. When the young man opened his eyes, the asphalt, or rather what was left of it, was burning before his feet. Some bystanders died as a result of this attack, and the worst part was that they never understood the reasons. A great panic ensued, but the monster was not interested in anyone except Andrew. Reflexively, the young man began to run away. He ran as fast as his legs would allow. All I could hear in my head was my heart pounding and a panicked mantra about escaping. It turned out not to be so fast. The black monster, catching up with its opponent, knocked him off his feet. It seemed that the monster was not going to kill the opponent immediately. He wanted to torture the boy. How to spank. While kneading its limbs on Andrew's body, the black monster entered into some incomprehensible excitement. The young man was gradually bleeding out and already thought he had no chance of survival. Situations from his unsightly school life immediately appeared before his eyes. He was beaten everywhere, at the slightest opportunity, and even now, of all the people around, the monster chose him as its target. Incredibly angry at the circumstances of his own existence, the young man lost control. He forgot that he was in reality and used one of his in-game superpowers against the black monster. Surprised that this move worked, Andrew watched his hand carefully. Not only the power, but also the sensations from the game turned out to be available in reality. Meanwhile, the black monster prepared for another attack. She took an advantageous position and released a pillar of flame towards the enemy. Everything else was based on instincts and reflexes. Andrew stopped the stream of fire with ease, using one of his abilities again. Without thinking twice, the schoolboy decided to rely on a scheme that definitely worked in this situation. He summoned the ghostly sword of vengeance to his aid. With this artifact, killing opponents of any class was not so difficult. The black monster rushed forward, but the guy was already eagerly awaiting her move. With one clear movement, he cut the monster in half without even blinking. What was left of the mutant from the game fell to the asphalt behind the young man. Looking at the consequences of his actions, the schoolboy felt real pride in himself for the first time in his life, especially since the remains of a mid-rank monster lay in front of him. The whirlwind of emotions was interrupted by a notification from the system. Andrew was congratulated on successfully completing his first task, and they offered to choose a reward for this quest. 30 seconds were allotted for the solution. The young man had to choose from 3 options: money, status points, and random boxing. Of course, at first glance, it seemed that material reward was the most relevant. But perhaps in the long run, another reward would be more meaningful. The system warned that if there was no choice, it would do everything itself. Such moral hesitation reached its peak when the countdown began in the last 10 seconds. In the end, Andrew was so confused that he poked at the first icon he could find. After the choice was made, the game announced a return to reality. The young man was captured by an electronic vortex. A moment later, he teleported to his room. The landing could not be called successful. After recovering from his initial state of shock, Andrew looked around. The students' surprise the next day was even greater. All the news was filled with reports of heavy civilian casualties on the other side of the city. People were being sought who could at least tell something about the events that the state considered terrorism. Media coverage testified to the very real reality of fighting a monster in real life. It seemed like the game was gradually getting out of control and consuming the world of people. Anxious thoughts about the future were interrupted by the appearance of my sister at home. As long as she didn't look at her brother, changing his shoes on the doorstep, everything seemed fine. But after completing her business, Megan returned to Andrew, and then silence fell in the apartment. Standing in front of her was not her younger brother, but an unfamiliar young man who was interested in her well-being. The stranger pretended that nothing strange was happening, and that was even more confusing. Finally, the woman's gift of speech returned, and she inquired about the identity of the interlocutor. And although the young man replied that he was her brother, it was impossible to comprehend. The woman thought that a robber had broken into their home, who was trying to get out of an awkward situation. In order not to show her fear, Megan reached into her handbag, calmly continuing the dialogue. But a second later, she pulled out a stun gun and started threatening the guy. The sister immediately moved from verbal clarification of the relationship to active actions. Andrew didn't want any fight, so he just tried to explain that he was indeed her brother. He himself understood perfectly well that it was almost impossible to believe this simply as a fact. Megan considered him a fragile and weak teenager, and it was strikingly different from the schoolboy's appearance now. The young man assured that he had pretended to be in this new guise in the morning and did not understand what exactly had happened. To stop the encroachment on the integrity of his body, Andrew began to recall facts from their life together. He listed everything his sister liked or didn't like, but the woman took it as a good job of studying her personality, nothing more. Despite her disbelief, she at least stopped trying to shock him with a taser again. Realizing that more effort was needed, Andrew began to talk about their parents. The guy noted that they died in an accident when he was still young. He told me about the argument he had with Megan that morning about the amusement park, and how he still blames himself for this reason for many years in a row. After these words, the woman's enthusiasm suddenly disappeared somewhere. She remembered that this detail was her brother's secret, which he had shared with her, and only with her. This indicated that it was Andrew who was standing in front of her now. Finally, the conversation between two close people moved to another, more peaceful plane. The only thing the schoolboy wasn't frank about was the wounds on his face. He didn't want to shock his loved one even more, because this reality was much more shocking. Because Megan was a healthcare worker, she knew well that any sudden, drastic changes in the human body were dangerous. So she began to agitate the boy to visit the nearest hospital and get tested. But Andrew was categorically against it. He understood that he would have to go through the same dialogue there, and more than once. The guy planned to just move on with his life and pretend nothing had happened. But it was a childish position that Megan did not support. She was thinking about school, anticipating that teachers will not appreciate such an approach on their part and will demand explanations. Understanding that a conversation with representatives of the educational institution is inevitable, the woman did not understand such strong resistance from her brother. She decided to carry out her plan today, citing her own competence as a healthcare worker. Megan didn't want to prove her point any further and simply began threatening the young man with a stun gun. Half an hour later, the sister and brother arrived at the school building. At the same time, Corinne, hurrying to class, was watching some blogger on YouTube. He talked about yesterday's tragedy, which took the lives of innocent people. In fact, the girl was not interested in the thoughts of the no-name. She was more concerned about the place, which urgently needed to be explored. Although the epicenter was far from the school, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of her friend. Donna assumed Corinne was watching something funny and was impressed with her choice. Inexplicably, the conversation between the two friends turned to a discussion of dating. This topic was interesting only to Donna. She, unlike her friend, was more socialized. Walking through the corridors to their class, the girls looked in surprise at the unfamiliar, handsome boy. He was walking to the teacher's office, accompanied by one of his relatives. So it was logical to assume that this was a new student trying to transfer from another school. While my friend was trying to make plans for a future date with a handsome guy, Corinne tried to remember where her friend was from. Meanwhile, Andrew's mind was occupied only with the approaching discussion about his own identity. He was afraid that no one would believe his sister's explanation. She was simply going to insist on her brother's unknown illness, which was still being studied at the hospital. Andrew had a well-thought-out plan for this case. Thanks to yesterday's training, the guy did acquire a useful artifact, but he didn't know for sure if it would work. The situation could have turned very badly and led to the police being called. Therefore, such a risk, in the guy's opinion, was completely justified. Andrew held a selective skill crystal in his hands, with which the boy wanted to use the spellcaster skill on the teachers. Controlling the minds of adults could allow a student to influence decisions about themselves. Up until this point, the skill had always been used to influence monsters, and the schoolboy was worried about its correct action on ordinary people. But there was no choice left. Hoping for understanding in such a situation was pointless. So Andrew activated the crystal. When he returned, his sister was trying to convince the class teacher that she was right. But it was unsuccessful. The man did not believe what he was told, considering the story a fabrication. Even Megan's assurances of the fidelity of sisterly feelings didn't work. The teacher insisted that they were trying to trick him, impersonating a complete stranger as a slender young man. Andrew, realizing that the situation was reaching a dead end, decided to use the artifact. Fortunately, the school's deputy principal was passing by the trio. A person in such a position could have a positive impact on the course of the situation. So the application of the crystal's effect on humans has finally found its test subject. The deputy director, if convinced, could influence the decisions of the entire teaching staff. In a moment, Andrew activated the enchantment skill. None of the people in the room noticed any changes. But the deputy director himself suddenly felt an unprecedented inspiration. He decided it was appropriate to stand up for a high school student who was being unfairly accused. The class teacher turned to the senior in surprise. He did not expect such a turn of events. But the deputy director, putting his hand on the boy's shoulder, suggested that he believe the family. The teacher didn't like this. He was afraid that this phenomenon would cause a wave of cheating in education. But the elder insisted, emphasizing that one should not judge people based on their appearance. This, from his point of view, was extremely unpedagogical and offensive to those around him. Such motivation of the deputy director impressed Andrew. The man's behavior seemed fake. The young man was afraid that the effect of the respected elder's words might have the opposite reaction to what was intended. When the sister saw a like-minded person in the room, she immediately grabbed him. She believed she owed this to her own gift of persuasion. But she didn't expect that someone at school would start defending her brother's rights so vehemently. In the end, the class teacher agreed with the deputy principal's opinion. And for the seniors, there was only one problem left: to convince the other students. Therefore, the elder decided to personally talk to Andrew's classmates. And this, in his opinion, needed to be done immediately to avoid unnecessary conversations. The teacher rushed after him. A little later, having placed the young man in front of him, the deputy director began his speech. He explained to the high school students that Andrew was in front of them, but he emphasized that any bullying regarding a boy's appearance should be nip in the bud, because all the visual changes were due to an unknown illness and brought tears to the deputy's eyes. For the first time in his entire career in teaching, the elder cried like a child, moved by Andrew's fate. All the high school students were shocked, and the young man himself, the perpetrator of the incident, had already foreseen the future consequences for himself. Realizing that it was necessary to complete the appeal, which was gradually turning into a tragicomedy, the class teacher, taking the deputy principal out, ordered his classmates to take care of Andrew. Confused and upset, the young man took off his backpack and walked to his desk. Donna couldn't miss her chance and drew her classmates' attention to herself. She was curious about how the loser turned into a beautiful swan. As expected, young people did not really believe the story about the illness. Andrew decided to go into a little more detail about the version that Megan was expressing. He emphasized that doctors believe he had acute change syndrome. Unexpectedly, the hypothesis put forward by the sister found a response from one of the young men sitting nearby. The first was immediately followed by a second confirmation. Corinne, who had been silently watching what was happening all this time, supported the young man. Andrew looked back at the girl in surprise, but she calmly told her classmates that she had heard a similar story from her father. Then it was about a German citizen who changed overnight. Thus, a bond was formed between Andrew and Corinne, which would grow stronger over time. There was no point in doubting the girl's words, because her father was the head of a pharmaceutical company. The young man's tension gradually became less and less. He could not believe that the danger had passed. Now Andrew could even assume that his existence at school would potentially change. By and large, he only needs to convince the hooligans he played with of his honesty. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by Corinne's question. The girl wanted to borrow the young man's headphones because apparently she didn't have her own. He gladly shared. For some reason, it was this conversation that signaled to Andrew that his position in society had changed. The social school hierarchy has always been distinguished by its passion for physical data. And now, those sculpted muscles that covered the body of the former outsider were playing their role. Andrew's body constitution gave him reason to dream that the bullying against him would finally stop. The guy didn't want to focus on assumptions. He no longer wanted to be left behind. The young man longed to have friends. And today fate gave him such a chance. The day at school was coming to an end, and the hero began to believe that the bad experience was over. The last lesson ended, and Andrew wrote to his sister about his day so that she would stop worrying. Donna approached the young man again, but this time with a proposal. The girl suggested taking a walk with Corinne. The offer was extremely tempting. It was impossible to refuse, so Andrew answered before he had time to think it over. But the message on the phone that arrived the next moment changed everything. It was David, and he demanded that the young man immediately come to the specified place, forgetting about his own affairs. Andrew understood that such issues needed to be resolved first, so he refused Donnie. The guy, with sadness in his heart, understood that he might not be invited again, but there was nothing he could do. It was necessary to hurry to the call. Unlike her friend, Corinne suspected that bad things might have been the reason for the rejection. "That's actually how it all happened!" Keith pounced on Andrew unexpectedly on the threshold of the men's restroom. He strangled his victim, who in panic forgot how to defend herself. Meanwhile, David and another fellow were expecting better action. The panic inside Andrew was growing more and more due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs. The guy blamed himself for not being able to defend himself. Despite the strong body that appeared in him, inside he lived the same terrified boy. Everything changed when he saw his former self, as if in reality. And that loser began to point out the obvious. All the problems were lurking in his head, because it was the brain that didn't give the new body the command to resist out of fear. This shouldn't have happened anymore. The bullying should have ended in this toilet. The little one demanded that he make efforts for his own release. And it worked. Suddenly, with the help of the determination skill, the boy threw the attacker over him. The cat, out of surprise, did not have time to orient itself and lost its balance. Shocked, the henchman fell silent. No one expected resistance from the loser. After what he had done, Andrew also, unexpectedly, again understood the problematic nature of the situation. It was impossible to stop a group of hooligans with one move, but just the opposite, to anger the villains even more. Instinctively, the boy's feet rushed to the door before his brain told them to. A fierce chase began. The girls standing near the school, waiting for the green light. They didn't plan on seeing Andrew running away from them. The young man saw no one or anything around him. He only wanted one thing, to get home safely. But Providence made adjustments to the boy's plans. Having tripped over a pebble on the road, the young man fell face down to the ground. While he was trying to get up, fighting his own fear, the bullies caught up with him. The angry boys were determined to give Andrew a good beating. In particular, Kit, who immediately kicked his classmate in the face. The first blow was so strong that the young man's head buzzed. But the torturer was not going to stop there, promising the victim incredible torment. The beatings rained down on Andrew like an avalanche. The young man couldn't seem to defend himself properly. It's not like resisting or fighting back. The guy, from such a beating, began to consider his actions in the men's room a terrible mistake. David, meanwhile, watched everything from the sidelines, not wanting to interfere. In his opinion, the guy was a loser, and such people needed to be taught their place in society. This catastrophe stopped as suddenly as it had begun, with the appearance of Corinne. Everyone present turned around at the sound of the broken can that the girl had dropped. The schoolgirl suggested that the bullies step back and leave the victim alone, because she needed Andrew herself and the rich woman was not going to share him with anyone. The cat turned indignantly towards the newcomer. He was not satisfied with such conditions, and although his henchman tried to explain all the circumstances to him, the guy's influence did not scare him. If necessary, the bully was ready to teach her a lesson in his own way. His entire menacing appearance and aggressive manner of communication had no effect on Corinne at all. The girl calmly endured the violation of her own boundaries without blinking an eye, and she still had the audacity to mock a guy who was used to physically dominating others. This fact made Keith extremely angry. He rushed forward, wanting to tear the impudent man in half. At that moment, Andrew realized that he could not stand aside and watch the girl being abused. It was necessary to take active action and forget about your own fears and suffering. Therefore, he ordered the torturer to stop immediately when he was already halfway to his goal. The cat looked back and was immediately punched in the face. The blow was so unexpected and powerful that he fell awkwardly to the ground. This time, Andrew wasn't going to run away. He wanted the bullying to stop. The appearance of the girl turned out to be a catalyst that helped him find courage. Keith's henchmen sought revenge. They couldn't figure out why, suddenly, the guy decided to fight back for the second time in a day. But they blamed such activity on injuries. But the brawler himself, who was being punched in the face, thought of nothing but revenge. He began to threaten his opponent with violence, taking off his hoodie. But this time, none of his words touched Andrew's heart. The young man was not afraid, even when the cat flew at him with the desire to smear it on the asphalt. The guy only thought about defense. He blocked his opponent's blows as much as his focus allowed. Due to lack of training and experience, Andrew missed many kicks. Because of this, the rest of the gang, who were watching the fight, began to consider the boy hopeless. But suddenly everything changed. With the help of the damage absorption skill, the hero blocked the opponent's blow. The grip of his hand was so powerful that Kit had no way to escape. And when it finally became clear that the attack had failed, the hooligan was hit by a ricochet. All the strength the villain put into the attack turned against him. The cat choked on blood. Although it could have stopped there, Andrew decided to repay his suffering. His fists worked like hammers in a forge, and to cause the greatest harm to the person who offended him. The young man also used his legs. In the end, Keith lost consciousness, unable to block any of the blows. Stunned, David and his henchman Anthony didn't know how to react. Their comrade was the largest of the company and the main tank during any skirmishes. He had never been in such an embarrassing situation before. And despite this, Andrew still seemed furious. He raised his fist for another blow to the villain's face, but the boy was stopped in time by Corin's scream. The girl was against such inhumane punishment. In her opinion, Andrew had already shown the villains the full power of his rage. While the young man looked at his hands in confusion, she picked up his backpack. But she encouraged Andrew to leave, emphasizing that bullies weren't worth the effort. When the boy and girl turned their backs on the rest of the company, Anthony rushed towards the young man with a shout, threatening him with a stick. He wanted revenge for his accomplice so much that he lost his instinct for self-preservation. To avoid another waste of time, the girl used her hidden powers. Not understanding what had happened, the attacker suddenly lost his balance and fell face down to the ground. He landed right at Andrew's feet and groaned in pain. When it became obvious that the fight would not continue, Corinne dragged the young man after her. Walking through the streets of the evening city, the boy and girl soon reached a cozy corner. There, the beauty was able to provide first aid to her new friend. But still, she continued to insist on seeing a doctor. To convince Andrew of the correctness of her opinion, she even took photographs of the beatings. The young man was not at all used to the fact that someone other than his sister could be so worried about him, so I decided to thank the girl for her efforts. But Corinne took it as a joke, because she didn't consider Andrew to be obligated to her. She replied that on the contrary, she had paid off the debt for the headphones she had borrowed earlier. She handed the thing to the owner with a mysterious look. The guy, with all the events that had happened today, had completely forgotten about such a small thing. Since it was already dark outside, it was time to say goodbye. But the girl promised that tomorrow she and the boy would have an important conversation. Therefore, she warned in advance that she would not mind discussing everything over a meal. Confused, Andrew could only agree with all the statements of his interlocutor. He liked her too much to refuse such little things. And the proposal from a new acquaintance could indicate a friendship that could arise between them. On the way home, Andrew puzzled over the topic he thought Corinne wanted to discuss. Suddenly, all assumptions vanished from his mind, because an urgent notification from the system materialized in front of my face. He was offered a quest to conquer, and it seemed was given a choice. The prospect of fighting a monster in the middle of the city again did not appeal to the boy, so he decided to give up immediately. But the system, as it turned out, could not tolerate the word no. She called this test mandatory because of the penalty points Andrew received. For using his skills on people, the guy was given as many as 400 points, which needed to be worked out immediately to avoid receiving a harsher punishment. Forced teleportation was announced a few seconds later, and before Andrew had time to grasp the full scale of the problem, and he had already disappeared into the digital pillar that was leading him in an unknown direction. As expected, after a couple of minutes, the guy teleported to the other side of the city, and he landed straight into the water. It was as if the program was taking revenge on him for his misuse of power. Sitting in the river, the schoolboy looked around. Not understanding where he was, the young man got to his feet and began checking important things for leaks. All of Andrew's dissatisfaction with the location disappeared when something interesting appeared before him. Doors began to materialize in the air. It was obvious that this was the path to the beginning of the quest. The young man realized that a monster would emerge from this portal, which he would need to deal with. The system began to further inflame the nerves, counting down the last 10 seconds. It was precisely because of this shocking way of communication that Andrew was completely confused. When the score was over, the door began to undergo metamorphoses. The portal gradually transformed into a giant monster in a helmet. With the naked eye, it was possible to see that she was hostile towards all living things. That's why the monster attacked first. The system reported that the name of the monster was the infected paladin Abel. But even without this information, Andrew knew perfectly well that he had seen such a creature for the first time. He didn't know how to resist this crazy humanoid lizard, and, since his opponent had a sword, the guy decided to take advantage of that as well. He hoped that in this way he would be able to study his opponent more effectively. The anxiety was also added by the fact that this was happening in real life, not just in a game. After repelling a couple of attacks from the attacker, the young man decided to take active action, which turned out to be quite successful. The monster met with resistance that she did not like. At first glance, Andrew assessed the prospect of conquering the enemy as not so illusory. It was easy to read the opponent and predict his next moves. So gradually, the young man developed a battle strategy. Then suddenly everything changed when he felt numbness in his leading hand. Seeing a pause in the boy's actions, the paladin seized the initiative again. The blow was really powerful. Andrew barely had time to group for defense, and after that he felt that the numbness had spread to his other hand. The giant continued to press, not giving him the opportunity to properly reflect on what was happening. The schoolboy saw the only way out for himself was to use one of the skills that could strengthen him. But to his surprise, the system prohibited activation. This happened to Andrew for the first time. He did not understand what such a refusal was connected with. Meanwhile, another blow from Abel prompted the young man to retreat. The situation the boy was in was becoming more difficult with every second. Due to the numbness of his limbs, the schoolboy became slower and was unable to resist the monster. Everything indicated that the monster was infecting its opponents with paralysis through its attacks, and the longer Andrew endured harm from him, the more he fell under the curse. The stalemate circumstances of the battle urgently needed to be outweighed in our favor. Otherwise, the boy would face death. In order not to freeze completely in the middle of the river, it was necessary to constantly dodge Abel's simple attacks, and in the meantime try to get an opponent. And although this tactic implied a long battle, there was no other choice. When everything was resolved unexpectedly, the paladin changed his behavior. He used some cunning spell and deprived the person of the ability to see. The complete darkness confused Andrew, but he understood that he needed to escape and do it immediately. But the monster didn't give him that opportunity. He caught up with the young man halfway and struck him on the body with a giant fist. Screaming in pain, the schoolboy fell to the shore, breaking rocks with his body. Fortunately, the effect of vision loss was temporary, and although he could already see Abel almost clearly, he still understood that he was unable to harm him. Suddenly, the young man thought of activating the secret boxes he had left. Avoiding his opponent's attacks, he waited for the right moment to communicate with the system. Andrew hoped to find something he needed for the fight in one of the boxes. The system obediently carried out the hero's order, although it did not deny him anything today. Andrew almost prayed that fortune would take pity on him, but it was all in vain. Neither the Golden Branch nor the Midnight Tear were of any use in this situation. Cold drops of sweat ran down the young man's back. He foresaw his doom. But it was not in his nature to give up, so Andrew continued to avoid a fight with the monster. Losing concentration for a moment, the young man again experienced the paladin's heavy blow. The pain was unbearable. The first was immediately followed by a second attack. The schoolboy was unable to run away because he had not yet recovered from the injury, so he began to defend himself. My brain, as if in a fever, tried to think of a way out. Suddenly, he remembered the preparation page that the system opened before the battle began, and immediately turned to her with a demand. Andrew ordered the Golden Branch to be activated, and with its help, the birds to be called, and at the same time open the preparation page. Everything was done exactly as the hero wanted, and while a flock of ravens gradually materialized around the paladin, preventing him from attacking that incredibly mad monster, the guy got his chance to survive. He traded the artifact he had left for medicine. Now, with the paralysis elixir, Andrew had the advantage in this duel. Without wasting time, the schoolboy applied the remedy. And when the effect of the ravens had dissipated, Abel rushed towards him again. The paladin struck with all his strength, his sword at what he thought was his opponent. But he was already behind him. With relief, the young man noted that his speed and agility had returned with their former strength. And thanks to the fact that all this time Andrew was accumulating damage from his opponent's blows, now the boy could use one of his most powerful attacks. The Pavana for the Dead fell on Abel's head like thunder out of a clear sky. With a devastating counterattack, the humanoid foot-and-mouth disease was finally destroyed. The task of subjugation, in the opinion of the schoolboy, was completed. Finally, Andrew could catch his breath. He understood perfectly well that his life was saved by chance, and since it turned out to be a rather traumatic experience, the young man was eager to receive the award as soon as possible. When it seemed that all the troubles were in the past, another unpleasant surprise occurred. An urgent notification obscured the reward screen. Another player had joined the quest. Until that moment, Andrew had not even suspected that he was not alone in such conditions. The unexpected guest did not begin his invasions from an acquaintance. He attacked the schoolboy from behind, apparently intending to get rid of his competitor. But the boy turned out to be more agile than the newcomer thought. Although the young man was surprised that his opponent was a human, he wasn't going to die at the hands of some scoundrel anyway. The situation was quite strange, as was the whole day in general. The opponent didn't say a word, but while he was catching his breath, Andrew had a little time. He had a good chance to get a good look at the other player. 100%, the skills of the unknown were present only in the Avengers class. In turn, having analyzed the potential victim, the newcomer rushed into the attack. The fight was fast-paced, and so far, the schoolboy had no opportunity to counterattack. But Andrew at least managed to repel all the blows. Eventually, the senseless fight began to tire the boy. He did not understand the reasons for the aggression, but the opponent had no answer to his question. He was just hunting. Using another skill, the stranger in the cap prepared for a new wave of blows, the first of which hit Andrew in the shoulder. Seeing the blood, the enemy became even more motivated for the next attack. The schoolboy understood perfectly well that there was no longer any chance of resistance. It seemed that today he would die after all. The young man did not know that the miracles in his life would not end there. Corin, who imperceptibly appeared behind him at the last moment, she built a protective shield between her opponents. The attacker had to urgently retreat. Unlike Andrew, he knew what it was. It turned out that his potential victim was not so defenseless. He was protected by an experienced labyrinth master. The surprised young man, looking back, saw his new girlfriend, who had already demanded payment from him in strawberry milk for this service. Many questions were swirling in Andrew's mind. But the high school student understood perfectly well that there was no time for that now, especially when the aggressor started attacking again. The stranger wanted revenge at any cost. He understood that the girl was the strongest link right now, so he directed all his anger at her. The attacker tried to break through the Corin defense, but the girl fiercely defended herself, using her own skills. She tried to trap her opponent, and at first glance it might seem that the idea worked. At least that's what Andrew thought. But Corinne saw perfectly well that her friend should not relax, because the enemy was already flying at him from behind. This time the villain didn't want to attack, he blacklisted the young man. Andrew's high rate of retreat did not help him avoid this. The matter was done, although, according to the analysis of his own body, it seems like nothing happened to the guy. Corinne understood perfectly well that he needed to escape immediately. She prompted Andrew to open the list of awards. This way, the boy could complete the quest and avoid further fighting. Realizing that the prey might escape, the hunter rushed forward. But he couldn't reach the young man. Even his blow was of no use. It was the girl's charm. The attacker got stuck in her labyrinth without ever realizing it. All he could do was watch as his opponent fled before his eyes. The skill's effect was supposed to last for a full 3 minutes, allowing for maneuvers. Finally, before teleportation, Andrew received a promise of death at the hands of a stranger, just like Corinne. The hunter declared himself as a good tracker who does not leave his victims alone. He was always used to getting what he wanted. 3 players disappeared from the quest location at the same time. And then, a few seconds later, Andrew was already standing on the street from which the system had picked him up on the way home. The first thing that happened after returning was a call from his savior. So a large number of questions flew towards the girl, but she didn't want to answer them today. Corinne demanded obedience from the young man. He had to go home immediately. Because he was in danger because of the blacklist for 8 whole hours, a hunter was looking for him. But this news made the boy worry more about the girl, because as he heard, that scoundrel wasn't going to stop at just him. Corinne talked about players who like to hunt competitors instead of monsters, and she emphasized that Andrew, as of today, is too weak for such a fight. Suggesting that her classmate head home, she emphasized that the conversation would take place tomorrow. But the schoolboy was still interested in her circumstances and worried about her. He couldn't let the girl risk her life, and no matter how much she denies the inappropriateness of such emotions. Ultimately, this behavior of the interlocutor made Corinne think. In principle, she wasn't against spending the night together. This made the young man blush. He hadn't even thought about it. He just wanted to join forces. His behavior and caring attitude prompted the girl to think about the team. Moreover, Andrew himself did not oppose this in any way. In some strange way, the schoolboy relied on Corin, although they haven't even spoken properly once to this day. Finally, at the end of the conversation, the classmate announced her decision. She wanted to spend the night together at Andrew's house and asked for his address. The boy could no longer hear anything due to the ringing in his ears, which was caused by excessive excitement. About an hour passed, and the classmate, as previously agreed, arrived at the young man's house. To be honest, the high school student didn't know how to behave in such a situation. Unlike Corinne herself, who seemed completely unconcerned, as if it wasn't the first time. Andrew couldn't get a word out of him. After giving the guy her backpack, the beauty began to take off her shoes and, in general, behave as if she were at home. The first thought that came to the young man's mind was the question of whether all this was really happening. Realizing, like all girls, that the guy has feelings for her, Corinne liked to deliberately make him blush. While the guest and the host were resolving everyday issues, she did promise to talk after the shower, though. In fact, Andrew wanted his sister home more than anything in the world right now. But as if on purpose, she turned up on the night shift today. So an exciting night of adventures awaited the boy. When the bath procedures were completed, the beauty felt really good. So she decided to inquire about the details of Andrew's life. The guy had to explain why he lives with his sister. He was even so frank as to announce the death of his parents. The sadness in the girl's eyes after what she heard touched his heart. Since he had no friends, he had long since lost the habit of opening up to other people. But Corinne was so sensitive in this situation that he didn't want to stop the conversation. Since the classmate found out that she had the whole night at their disposal, she decided to sort out the issues of the main issues between them. The guy's breath caught when the woman he was talking to violated his personal boundaries. With the eyes of a frightened rabbit all red with shyness, Andrew had forgotten how to speak. But the girl seemed not to be going to stop. She liked what she saw. Still, the two of them had urgent matters to deal with, so Corinne called the system. She decided to send a request to join Andrew in the party with her. The boy's heart immediately felt relieved. He realized that he had been worrying in vain. A few seconds later, the system notified him of a new request. The girl emphasized that before accepting or rejecting, they needed to discuss the little things. She promised the young man comprehensive support in all his endeavors, reliable rear protection, which meant complete dedication to the cause. But she demanded the same attitude towards herself from him. This was a crucial aspect of their future relationship that she felt Andrew should have considered. So she was willing to give him the time to think all night long. And I never expected that my classmate would respond to my request so quickly. But Andrew's logic was simple. He understood perfectly well that he was too weak for constant quests without help today. Therefore, collaborating with someone who was also such an advanced player was useful. He considered Corinne a gift from heaven for himself, and his trust in her was unwavering after the last fight. When the young man had said everything as best he could, it was the beauty's turn to melt at his words. She hadn't felt anything like this in a long time, so she immediately got angry. The girl didn't like feeling uncomfortable, but organizing the team meant the beginning of developing a joint strategy. As it turned out, the hunter wasn't Corinne's only target. The most important quest in this game for the girl, and for many others, was an event called Horizon. Of course, Andrew had never heard of this before. None of the players knew exactly when the main test would begin, but this did not prevent the teams from carefully preparing for the tournament. The girl's plans, of course, included victory, which she wanted to achieve with Andrew's help. According to the terms of the quest, the winners received a cash prize and the fulfillment of any wish. The material prize was really big, 20 billion. This immediately caused the young man's jaw to fall off. But the second aspect, with the fulfillment of the winner's wish, only made the guy smile. But Corinne insisted that given the circumstances and the conditions they were playing in, both the first and the second could turn out to be completely real things, because monsters in the real world did not lend themselves to any logical explanation. Andrew hasn't received an invitation to this quest yet simply because he hasn't completed enough tasks. At least 8 monsters awaited the schoolboy for the desired letter. Corinne had already completed about 17 quests, so he still had a lot to work on. But the girl still couldn't figure out how the player had moved from the virtual to the real world, because even a trip to the Ergosphere's gaming room ended with a conversation about her madness. The physical changes were not as drastic as those of the young man. Therefore, neither parents nor the people around them understood them, especially since the closest people, mother and father, did not pay any attention to the girl at all. The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected noise outside the door. Both interlocutors turned in that direction, listening. Corinne decided to secure the home by using one of her skills. She built a watchtower for the labyrinth, which was supposed to signal the approach of enemies, and especially hunters who could attack at any moment. The tower was invisible to other players of that class, so there was nothing to worry about. After a short silence, Corinne suddenly asked the owner of the house to stretch, and although Andrew's first thought was harassment on her part, everything turned out to be much simpler. The girl wanted to provide first aid to the young man and treat his injuries. Although she wasn't a healer in the traditional sense of the word, the high school student had the ability to increase her friend's stamina. After a while, Andrew's body absorbed the blue light of the girl's energy. While the improvised treatment was taking place, the young man decided to inquire about what was important to him. Since he had told about his motivation, The boy was now interested in the motives of his classmate, because in his opinion now the beauty was taking on an additional burden instead of helping. But he was deeply mistaken because of his insecurity. She remembered their first meeting in the game well, and she decided to remind the young man who he really was. It was an extremely difficult dungeon that not even 1% of all players had completed. The group the girl was helping was generally unhappy, and when it seemed that there was no hope left at all, a lone warrior appeared, disregarding any difficulties. Andrew was focused only on the process, not paying attention to anything else. While players from the group where she worked as a mercenary were dying around her, the guy seemed to have no business doing anything. He was not affected by the stalemate of the situation. This was the moment when Corinne became seriously infatuated with another person. But apparently the girl didn't plan to tell Andrew about it at all. This is what motivated her to agree to team up with him now. The girl believed that the young man would be able to find in himself the strengths that he had not noticed before, and she also understood that it was wonderful for the two of them to talk about such things without shame. It was nice to share with someone the burden of a heavy burden that was weighing down harder and harder every day. While the healing was being completed in Andrew's apartment, another quest was taking place nearby. This time 2 players competed against the monster. The boy had extraordinary strength, with which he successfully destroyed the monster's armor, and the girl, staying away, increased the damage from the blows by lowering the opponent's defense. At the decisive moment, all that remained was to cut off the mutant's head. At this point, the quest was successfully completed. Kelly, that was the young lady's name, turned to her partner. Leo was dissatisfied with this task, finding it extremely easy. It didn't promise good rewards, but they still had to be taken. Suddenly, Kelly stopped and fell silent. She felt that somewhere nearby, one of the players was using his own power. Moreover, there was no quest nearby. This made the woman incredibly interested. She had already planned how to monitor competitors, but that had to be done tomorrow morning because today was a busy day. After turbulent events in reality, Andrew's adventures ended in a vivid dream. At first, the guy didn't understand where he was, but the appearance of the monster opposite made him think that nothing good awaits him. Gradually, incomprehensible metamorphoses began to occur with the monster. As a result, the already familiar Grim Reaper appeared, and while the schoolboy was stunned by what he saw, the attacker rushed towards him with the intent to kill. Of course, Andrew started to run away. He felt completely helpless. He ran through the long corridors trying to find his way out of this strange building, and then, running around one of the turns, he noticed an exit door at the end. Hoping that the nightmare was over, the boy grabbed the handle that wouldn't budge. Through a small window on the mountain, Andrew saw a boy playing in the sand. This was little David back when they were still friends before their parents died. For some reason, the schoolboy was sure that the boy would help him overcome the obstacle, but the boy did not react. No amount of pleading could make the child even look back. Suddenly, before Andrew's astonished eyes, the boy turned into a young man. The leader of the hooligans rose to his feet, still not in a hurry to turn around when called. And it was probably for the better, because when it did happen, it turned out that he was a monster in human form. Andrew woke up in a cold sweat in his room. He hadn't experienced such horrors in a long time. It took the boy several minutes to come to his senses and realize that the nightmare was over. Immersed in his own experiences, the young man completely forgot about the guest, and he looked around in fear at her voice. It turned out that the girl had moved into his room and settled on the floor next to the bed. She did it at night because it felt safer with him. And now, kneading her stiff body, Corinne decided to play once again on Andrew's feelings. Her veiled flirtations made the guy lose his self-control again. The young man literally wanted to fall through the ground. A little later, also together, the students set off for school. Corinne began giving orders and distributing responsibilities within the team in a businesslike tone. Andrew had to improve himself by studying his own abilities. Repeating with penalty points was not allowed, because both of them would be responsible for it. This will take both time and money at the same time and deprive the development team. All the party's efforts had to be directed towards completing new quests, which in fact was what Corinne was going to do. Having promised not to do such foolish things again, Andrew solemnly ended this topic of conversation. He had been unbearably curious ever since last night to see what wish his partner wanted to fulfill, and although the girl slyly joked about this topic, making him feel embarrassed, the young man still did not back down. In the end, Corinne agreed to answer this question if they won the next quest. Having agreed on this, they parted ways, without noticing that he was being watched from a car parked nearby. Kelly was pleased with what she saw. Fortunately, potential candidates were found quickly. Although the classes of these players were specific, they turned out to be still children. Thanks to her impressive skill, the woman could see all the characteristics of her opponents without error. Leo, who was driving, was not very happy with this promenade. He believed that the school children should be finished before the main competitions. But the woman had a different opinion on this matter. She did not see the teenagers as a threat, because the Avenger and the Labyrinth Master were classes that the guild did not possess as of today. Despite all objections, Kelly believed they needed to be recruited. She ordered Leo to assign people to observe the skills of these two in more detail. And if the results are decent, the students will only have to go through a personal interview. After class, walking down the street, Andrew began practicing his playing skills. And at the same time, I looked up information about the abilities of the Labyrinth Masters. It turned out that Corin was a very useful and powerful player. With the help of the girl's skills, it was possible to hedge well in difficult battles. And in symbiosis with his Avenger class, they made an extremely successful tandem. The young man did not notice how a stranger suddenly approached him. Leaving his companion at a distance, the young man asked about the hero's name, which out of surprise confused the guy. It was obvious that these two strangers were expecting him. They were offering a private conversation. The offer of negotiations turned into threats when the villain pulled out a knife. Andrew was seriously scared. Of course, the schoolboy offered almost no resistance and was taken to a nearby parking lot without any problems. The young man was hardly surprised when he saw among those present Anthony, David's stepfather. The bully looked at his classmate with hatred and a thirst for revenge. He could not forget Andrew's impudent behavior towards himself and Keith, and most importantly, his shame. Therefore, he ordered the hero to be beaten by even more of the guys who had been beaten to death. Predicting the boy's ignominious defeat, Anthony began to brazenly shout arrogant reproaches. He insisted that enduring beatings was a young man's duty. Andrew, meanwhile, was trying to come up with a successful strategy for himself. He understood that he couldn't run away this time. He had to fight back. But he did not forget about Corin's instructions. All that remained was to rely on his own physical strength. Dodging the first attacker's blow, the hero immediately counterattacked. He punched his opponent straight in the face with all his strength, and in front of his surprised accomplices, he flew back a few meters. The second hooligan immediately rushed to help the first. It was about twice as big. Therefore, he needed more damage to eliminate him, in the form of a kick to the head. A successful jump in relation to acceleration did its job. Having neutralized two opponents, Andrew hoped that the others would stop, because after all, they were, although aggressive, but still human. But the opposite happened. The scoundrels rushed forward in full force. Therefore, the schoolboy decided not to lose his enthusiasm and determination. He no longer wanted to be a whipping boy, but he was quite successful in defending his own opinion. None of the attackers were able to cause any harm to the young man. On the contrary, they were forced to swallow their own blood and complain about his skill. Anthony was disappointed. His expectations were not met. All that was left was to rely on one's own strength and rage. The mercenaries, of course, did not give up trying to achieve their goals. They were not at all flattered that one schoolboy was able to fend off everyone at the same time. But each subsequent attempt turned into a disaster for them. Understanding that this way you will not achieve any advantage, Anthony decided to help his henchman and attack from behind, which was his style. Grabbing a pipe that lay nearby, he rushed forward. And although the attempt seemed surprisingly promising at first, it ultimately led to nothing. Nothing except a bent pipe, and an even angrier Andrew, who, a few seconds after that, punched Anthony in the face for the first time. A classmate fell to the floor like a sack of potatoes, arms outstretched. He trembled with rage, incapable of open, active confrontation. Andrew calmly walked up to him and pressed his foot down. The hero kept his foot on his opponent's torso, listening to the stream of dirt that began to pour down on him. Anthony threatened to enlist the support of his elders and deal with the schoolboy. But today, such threats seemed completely empty to the young man. From now on, he would not be harmed. Calmly allowing his opponent to absorb this thought, the guy walked towards the parking lot exit. But among the mercenaries, there was one who wanted revenge for his humiliation the most. The bully rushed at the schoolboy from behind, wanting to stab him. The hero realized that it was too early for him to end the educational conversation. About an hour passed, and Megan had just finished her shift at work. The woman was walking home thinking about what groceries she needed to buy for dinner. Focused on the screen of her own smartphone, she didn't notice anything around her. Soon her thoughts smoothly refocused on caring for her brother. Because of her work, Megan didn't have time to take a proper interest in his life to understand what he was passionate about. Near the house, unexpectedly, Andrew himself came across her. At first glance, the woman knew that the guy was in trouble. He looked unkempt and smelled of sweat, as if he had run a mile. The young man had to lie so as not to worry his sister. He made up a story about playing football with his friends, who were actually lying unconscious in the parking lot right now. The guy quickly changed the topic of conversation to everyday matters. Over the years of bullying at school, the hero has already learned to hide the truth at an expert level. Megan watched her brother silently, still trying to get used to his appearance. Except for this circumstance, Andrew was exactly the same as before. Such sudden moments of observation and analysis have occurred quite often recently. The sister was not good at hiding her thoughts, and the schoolboy began to think that she missed his old appearance. But right now, Megan decided to answer him clearly. The new one is even better, especially if it will help Andrew himself in life and make him happy. The hero didn't want to talk about the fact that Corinne spent the night with him yesterday. But my sister, with the logic of adults, guessed everything herself. The girl was given away by a hair in the bathroom, which gave rise to a new topic of conversation. Watching Andrew disappear, Megan asked with a smile to introduce her friend. Having regained consciousness in the parking lot, the hooligans tried to find the strength to crawl home. Anthony was only beaten and humiliated, unable to walk or talk normally. He sought immediate retribution for his suffering. Therefore, I decided to enlist the support of a friend. An impromptu party was happening at David's apartment. Therefore, the guy did not immediately hear the phone ring. But as soon as I picked up the phone, I regretted it almost immediately. He was showered with angry stories and comments about how bad Andrew was. Anthony insisted that the leader of the class bullies should personally teach the insolent one a lesson. After listening to the whining of his unhelpful comrade, David briefly agreed. Gradually, Andrew's social life began to change. Classmates began to notice that the boy had become close to the richest student in the school. The girl did not shy away from communicating with the young man in public, suggesting that they do something together. Corinne even emphasized that her plans were to spend time just the two of them. Because of this, one day Donna began to resent her friend. These two new friends suddenly had extremely important topics to discuss, and it seemed that all other matters and companies took a back seat. This behavior began to generate gossip about the relationship between the boy and the girl, which was incredibly annoying to David, who didn't understand what such a beauty found in this loser. Of course, the opinions of her classmates eventually reached Corinne. The rich woman was absolutely not against a real relationship, which she immediately informed Andrew about. A sudden proposal from his girlfriend nearly killed the young man, who choked on juice. He couldn't understand why the girl suddenly decided to talk about something personal. But since Corinne didn't back down from her offer, Andrew had to promise to think about it. Having finished the intimate topic, the Labyrinth Master announced the availability of a good quest. It was supposed to take place today and had a status available to all players. This meant that within the challenge, you would also have to compete with other teams. But because of that, the rewards for winning were much better. This was a good chance to improve the party's capabilities, which Corinne was not going to miss. But the participation of others also indicated the danger from the hunters and reapers of death. Since Andrew has never participated in a group quest before, to him this idea seemed interesting. He gladly agreed to take part in this. While constantly analyzing the team's skills, the guy was convinced that they were a perfect match. All that remains to be done is to gain experience in teamwork. The determination that shone in the young man's eyes really appealed to Corinne. This gave the girl confidence in his rapid adaptation and advancement in the rankings. At the appointed time, both participants arrived at the appropriate location. It turned out that none of my classmates were well acquainted with this location, and this meant that they would need to rely on their own strength while completing the quest. The only thing Andrew had already learned was that you need to look for monsters near the black door. But as it turned out, Corinne had never seen anything like it. The girl listened in surprise to the young man's story about the monsters appearing from there. This gave her the understanding that Andrew was not an ordinary player, and the guy, in turn, doubted whether he had correctly assessed the situation in this regard earlier. The analysis of my own imperfections was interrupted by the appearance of a notification from the system, which started the countdown. Corinne immediately ordered her assistant to open the battle preparation page. She wanted to choose healing items and purchase additional power-ups. Of course, the girl also had time to think about her partner. The young man shyly asked to buy some hills and a speed boost. When all the organizational details were resolved, it was time to discuss the payment for the service. We came together for another portion of goodies for a friend. The system announced the start of the quest. Teleporting to the location, the players immediately encountered their opponent. This monster was already known to the young man. The nimble wolf Vaham rushed along a deserted city street. The creature was a kind of god who did not attack first, but could counterattack extremely powerfully. Since they would never have expected provocation from the monster, it was decided to act alone. Corinne advocated catching up with the monster and killing it, driving it into a corner. But Andrew wanted the girl to create a powerful trap. While she is wasting time on this, the guy will personally lure the wolf with an attack. He was adamant about his decision, despite all his partner's objections. After discussing the details, the boy activated his sword. He wasn't at all afraid of acting as bait, because in extreme situations, his class had the ability to become stronger. All that was left for Corinne to do was to fulfill his part of the duties. Although she did not admit this to her friend, his safety was a fundamental condition for the girl. Meanwhile, Andrew ran down the street at top speed, chasing the agile wolf. From his riddles and experience, Vaham, although he was the most agile, was not distinguished by extraordinary strength. The appearance of the competitor initially confused the young man. The girl was extremely fast compared to him. This indicated a different class. The windrunners were distinguished by such skills. The competitor also drew attention to a representative from another team, but she didn't spend much time on this because her party's top priority was winning the quest. Andrew gritted his teeth in frustration. He could afford to lose, so he decided to use one of his own skills. After a few minutes of pursuit, the runner managed to catch up with her prey. The wolf didn't stop, so the girl decided to attack at speed. Using her skill, she generated a blade with which she delivered the first blow. The monster screamed in pain, but the blow was not fatal. Of course, the runner didn't expect this, so she prepared for the next attack. Using the second generated blade, she struck the wolf several more times. Vaham, dripping with blood, growled with rage. This time the monster decided to fight back. During the pause that followed, the girl called out to her partner, and he in a moment came to help. The young man was a representative of a different class and had the ability to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Using one of his skills, Richard hit the opponent with his shield. Such a powerful energy blow threw the monster back several meters. Rich decided to take advantage and finish off his opponent with a combination of two skills. But unexpectedly, plans changed with the appearance of Andrew on the horizon. The young man, sword at the ready, flew straight for the monster's head. Shocked, the runner couldn't understand how they had been caught up so quickly. In fact, the schoolboy sacrificed his own protection for this, increasing his agility, which left him with only one chance for a successful attack. Maximizing the possibilities of a lethal attack, he rushed headlong into the fight, and although the blade's edge did injure the enemy, it turned out not to be a fatal blow. The wolf managed to dodge and even made the young man jump back. It was an unpleasant situation, but not the end of the world. We had to come up with a new strategy. Focused on his own match, the guy paid no attention to the runner's discontent, and she was obviously categorically against his intervention. The girl began to accuse Andrew of some kind of code of honor, despite the fact that it was just a competition. She demanded that the young man step back and leave the prey to them. After listening to such an unconventional, from his point of view, opinion, the high school student apologized for his own impudence. But he still wasn't going to back down from hunting the agile wolf. Watching the competitor attack the monster, the competing team could only grit their teeth. Ultimately, Richard decided to thwart Andrew by interfering in the course of events. Although it was the first time the boy had done this, the act of impoliteness was dearer to him than ever. Using his skill, he surrounded the young man with a restraining wall. The angry schoolboy didn't know what to do. All attacks on the vault were fruitless. Its power was not working. It was something like a protective dome. The walls were only sensitive to outside influences. But he couldn't afford to just stand there and wait for the effect to wear off. After careful consideration, it was decided to use a penetrating spike attack. Although this matter will also take quite a bit of time. But still, it will allow you to be free faster than the usual wait. A few precious minutes passed, during which the group of competitors managed to move away from the prisoner. And finally, the protective dome cracked. Andrew decided to put in even more effort for his release because he was at the finish line. When the deed was done, the boy immediately began to chase after his prey. He ran as hard as he could towards the sounds of battle. But when he got there, he saw that the wolf was nowhere to be seen. only the team of competitors stood on the road. Since the boy and girl barely moved at some point, Andrew suspected that they were already dead. But fortunately, they were not injured. They simply lost visual contact with the monster. Vaham simply disappeared, and it happened suddenly. Until that moment, Andrew had no idea that wolves with teleportation skills existed. Meanwhile, the monster was already flying towards them, intending to attack their opponents. The trio quickly looked around, preparing to defend. The monster's capabilities went beyond the game data, and it was confusing. But there was no time to think about possible other surprises. Vaham decided to attack Richard. He clenched the man with his teeth, almost biting through his torso. The thing screamed in incredible pain, unable to escape the mouth on its own. The partner immediately rushed to help. Using her skill, she generated 2 daggers. The runner hoped that this would help at least distract the monster's attention to herself. But at the most crucial moment, the wolf disappeared. Confused, the boy and girl looked around. Precious time was passing, and Rich's whereabouts remained unknown. Andrew decided to consider changing his strategy due to the monster's teleportation skill, because in that case, none of Corinne's traps could work, and the companion herself would be in extreme danger at a distance from the young man. Meanwhile, the hero's classmate has finished creating the trap. The wolf appeared as unexpectedly as it disappeared. He still held Richard, who appeared to be unconscious, in his teeth. Suddenly, the monster opened its mouth and dropped its prey. The partner's first desire was to rush to the victim, but she had used up too much strength and was temporarily unable to move. Vaham prepared to jump. He aimed precisely at the runner, and she was already beginning to think about her imminent death. The girl closed her eyes, trying to imagine that this would save her. But when she opened them, she saw that her competitor had boldly rushed to cut the monster. She didn't understand the reasons for this behavior from a member of the other team. "Because I would never do that in my life." But it was simple. Andrew wanted to do what his heart told him to do. Counterattacking Vam, the schoolboy made him run away, and this caused new questions to arise. It seemed that teleportation was temporarily unavailable for the creature. Suddenly, a thought struck Andrew. This wolf ability had its own cooldown period. A second later, a message came from Corinne about her readiness to implement the plan. After thinking about his next steps for a while, the hero offered his competitor temporary cooperation. He agreed to give the girl a hill for a partner in exchange for a little help. Although she immediately started arguing about it, the young man understood perfectly well that she had no choice. Otherwise, she wouldn't have attacked the monster instead of healing her friend. In the Avengers' opinion, the competitors had no better choice to avoid dire consequences. Both teams could be useful to each other. Richard, bleeding profusely, gave his consent with his last strength, and this proved decisive. Human life obviously prevailed in the battle against competition. When the parties reached an agreement, the runner introduced herself. Her name was Amanda. Andrew emphasized that the boy and girl need not worry. There was no risk for them. Sometime later, the temporary companion was already tracking down the agile wolf. In their plan, the hero fell alive. The role of the other two was simple: to anger the monster and guide him on the right path. At some point, Amanda saw an opponent running down the street. At the same second, the girl generated a blade using a skill. She lunged down, mimicking an attack on Waham. Jumping back to a safe distance, Amanda began to wait for a reaction. The monster growled angrily, indicating its interest in a fight. Realizing that in that case the wolf would run after her, the girl began to run away. Since the cooldown wasn't over yet, the monster had to simply chase its prey. At some point, at a checkpoint, Richard joined his partner. The man used the barricade skill against the four-legged creature. All that remained was to bring Andrew himself into the game. The hero rushed into the attack, activating a combined buffing skill. He skillfully avoided the giant's teeth, delivering a cascade of blows. After a series of combinations, the young man jumped back to analyze the situation. This confrontation did not promise to be easy due to the wolf's agility. Therefore, in order to help Corinne, it was necessary to significantly reduce it, in addition depriving Vaham of the ability to teleport. And to do this, the guy was ready to expose himself. Because he was sure that the monster could only move in space twice in a row, the agile wolf rushed to the attack. And this time, for protection, the hero decided to use the Flame of Vengeance skill. Giving his all, the guy didn't even suspect that his actions were being closely watched. Two members of Kelly's guild found the schoolboy's strategy fascinating. Only one thing was important to them: the young man's ability to see the portal for monsters. Although the skill used reduced health, it increased the power of the blow. Therefore, the first attack of this confrontation turned out to be impressive. The wounded wolf jumped back. but only to regroup and attack the young man again. Having let the monster close, Andrew repeated his maneuver. Another blow hit the creature's muzzle area, and this forced Vaham to use teleportation once again. The plan was slowly working. All that remained was to wait for the monster to decide to appear on the horizon again. It happened faster than the schoolboy thought. The clever wolf did the same thing to him as he did to Richard. But these were exactly the actions Andrew actually expected from him, and this made it possible to activate the skill. It accumulated damage inflicted by the opponent and generated it into a powerful counterattack. The Pavana for the Dead was ready in a few seconds. Dozens of blades aimed at the monster, which still held its victim in its jaws. Vaham hoped he could avoid the blow. In the end, the explosion did happen, but the monster managed to teleport away, leaving Andrew behind. Surprised, the schoolboy saw in front of him artifacts from his skill. The ability to move in space was now unavailable to the enemy for a while, and as it turned out, after Vaham reappeared, he still couldn't avoid all the swords. 2 blades were sticking out of his back, causing great pain. For him, these people turned out to be more powerful than they seemed at first. So for his own self-preservation, he ran away. But it was only Andrew's turn. The monster ran towards Corinne's trap. If the girl did everything conscientiously, the guy will have the opportunity to destroy the chained monster. Of course, Amanda decided to take advantage of the situation and catch up with her prey. She hoped she could deal with the wounded creature on her own. But for this case, the guy had something interesting in mind. He quickly healed himself and used the speed boost his partner had purchased for him. Thus, having secured himself from losing and increased his defense, he was ready for competition. Andrew flew forward like a rocket. The world around me merged into a solid gray blur. After a couple of seconds, he saw the runner in front of him. The girl looked at her competitor in surprise, not understanding why he had suddenly become so fast. But this time, Andrew swept past her like a hurricane, having no desire to talk. Amanda had to accept that this quest had turned into a defeat for her group. The clever wolf fell into Corinne's trap just as the young man had hoped. It's time for the final showdown. With the help of the partner's reinforcement, which the girl made, now the hero didn't even have to use his own skills. With one blow, Andrew finished off the monster and completed the quest, during which he and Corinne's team walked on the blade. Although he planned to use the speed boost to save his partner, it came in handy for the final push. Since the task was brilliantly completed, it was time to choose a reward. And on top of that, Andrew, in Corinne's opinion, deserved recognition for his achievements. The system rolled out a congratulatory message. It turned out that they managed to complete the quest earlier than expected. Therefore, higher quality prizes awaited the boy and girl. The table with the ranks of the participating teams, of which there were 3, was also surprising. Since only Amanda's group was in sight, it turned out that the other competitors were simply hiding. In principle, this was the case, if you do not take into account the original goal of the Kelly Guild members. At the end of the battle, one of them expressed his opinion on the candidate's abilities. Another was not so positive about potential newcomers. He believed that defeating such a monster was not worth their attention. But the schoolchildren's supporter emphasized the uniqueness of the wolf and the hero's cleverness, which made them exceptionally good candidates for guild membership. They refrained from evaluating and reporting to their elders because they understood that the adventures were not over yet. Next up was a confrontation with a player hunter. Meanwhile, Andrew and Corinne were leisurely choosing their award. The guy decided to trust the girl's opinion on this matter. She was guided by the goal of buying a time difference generator, and for this she needed money. A first-class item was difficult to acquire even in the game, but he could be very useful in the final test and provide your teammates with an extra life. The discussion about future plans was interrupted by the appearance of Amanda and Richard. They congratulated their competitors on their victory in a unique way, but not with malicious intent. The girl had already cooled down in her anger. Andrew introduced Corinne's interlocutors and talked about their help. Meanwhile, Richard thanked for his rescue in a difficult moment, but he announced his desire to become friends. The hero didn't know how to react at first, because he was considering his girlfriend's reaction, but she seemed to be okay with it, without promising any favors on the occasion. But it was really just about friendly relations. Because neither Amanda nor Rich felt strong enough to compete with competitors on a serious level, the matter was resolved and agreed upon, after which one guy sent another a friend request. But unexpectedly, the system warned players about the danger. A hunter appeared out of nowhere. Grinning predatorily, he was ready to pounce on potential victims at once. The comrades in turn prepared for defense. Richard, having activated the protective barrier skill, took it upon himself to protect his new acquaintances. He ordered them to collect their awards immediately. But at that very moment, the wall was broken by one powerful blow, and the boy himself was injured. Since the injury was serious, he was no longer able to defend himself. So Amanda rushed to her friend's aid. The girl hoped that the surprise attack would confuse the enemy, but he, using the skill of generating copies, immediately counterattacked. The runner was injured just a second later. The girl had to retreat because her opponent was too fast, faster than her. Only a trap generated by the maze master stopped the villain, which the girl herself had already forgotten about. This played into the friend's hands, because at that very moment Andrew rushed at the hunter from above. Having previously increased the strength and speed of his blows, the guy was able to cut off the enemy's limb. The player hunter barely had time to catch his breath. It seemed he didn't want to fight anymore. In front of the astonished young men and women, the man ran away. Realizing that the rival team is badly injured, Andrew asked Corinne to arrange their treatment, while he himself hoped to finish what he had started, understanding that the hunter would not simply back down. He didn't want to hear any objections because he was worried about his loved ones. In the end, all that was left for Corinne to do was wish him luck and give him a few pointers. Andrew began the pursuit. He had been running for several minutes, and finally, the silhouette of a person began to appear ahead. The hunter sat leaning on his own spear, but when he saw his opponent, he immediately got to his feet. It turned out to be a well-thought-out trap. He was waiting for Andrew to arrive. The young man immediately rushed into the attack, trying to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy. But he, thanks to his own agility, managed to jump back. After how many seconds did the villain get the time difference generator? Such a desired object could finally be seen in action. But this did not add to the enthusiasm because it indicated that a new clash would occur very soon. With the help of the artifact, the player hunter quickly recovered his lost arm. And immediately after that, the field was activated, which outlined the boundaries of the dual territory. The villain attacked first, but Andrew, well understanding the development of events, was already prepared for it. The attacker, relying on his advantage in speed, tried to strike first, and although the schoolboy managed to repel the spear, it only caused a new wave of desire to kill him. The hunter laughed in the young man's face, not understanding where his courage had gone. He began to believe that he could deal with his opponent with complete impunity. It should be noted that the scoundrel's audacity was reinforced by his skill in delineating the duel's territory. With this trick, he reduced his opponent's agility and attack power. Andrew understood that there had to be a way out of this situation, because the player hunter didn't let him relax for a second. Realizing that a simple spear was ineffective against the hero, the antagonist activated the halberd. It was extremely difficult to contain such pressure on myself. Andrew gritted his teeth, trying to keep the situation under control. But I still got hurt, even after blocking the blow. This indicated that the killer resorted to a variety of tricks to win. He did not shy away from staining himself with shame because, as a rule, there was no one to tell about such antics. Andrew understood that the opponent was too experienced and agile and knew his strengths. Without exaggeration, the scoundrel was a master of his craft, having developed a winning scheme for the duel. The hero decided, in this case, to resort to the only correct strategy, to render the opponent's plan ineffective. The schoolboy rushed forward, rapidly closing the distance to his opponent. At first he even considered such a strategy stupid, but nevertheless he changed the halberd to a spear. The player hunter made a sharp lunge towards Andrew, causing a powerful explosion. When the victim disappeared in the smoke, the villain began to rejoice, believing that he was done with this matter. But, to his surprise, a moment later the enemy quickly ran out of there. Since the schoolboy was running in the opposite direction from his opponent, the opponent mistook it for an escape, and with his mind clouded by the thirst for murder, he rushed to catch up with the young man. On the way, the killer threw a spear at the boy, and although Andrew could clearly see the artifact flying towards him, he did nothing to avoid an explosion during the collision. The player hunter smiled contentedly, but only until the smoke cleared, because Andrew used one of his skills to absorb the opponent's blow, although it cost him health points. This behavior of the opponent was expected because the young man was leaving his designated battlefield, thereby regaining full strength and agility. But by absorbing these spontaneous final attacks, Andrew could compensate for his damage. Now it was the young man's turn to repay the scoundrel with his own coin. Surprised, the attacker watched as the boy used his own well-developed techniques. The schoolboy threw a spear towards the player hunter. He didn't have time to react and somehow try to dodge the blow. The injury was serious, but still not fatal. Having recovered a little from the unpleasant surprise, the scoundrel prepared to counterattack. He activated the World Conquest Fever skill and immediately found himself on a horse with spears. Relying on the increased penetration rates of any defense, he rushed forward. And although Andrew expected it to be difficult, the damage done to him was significant. The hunter was not going to stop there, so he went on a new circle, which the schoolboy was actually really looking forward to. He started the countdown. This was the countdown to completing the skill of delineating the boundaries of the dual territory. And when the last second passed, the hero's linked stats returned to their places. From now on, the guy promised his opponent a visit to hell. Although he was in captivity of rage and hatred, he thought only about his own ambitious plans. The man didn't understand that without his cunning tricks in a fair fight, he would significantly lose to Andrew. He only realized this when the very first counterattack knocked him off his horse. And besides, she seriously cut her collarbone. The player hunter fell to the asphalt. From now on, he lost the initiative in battle. Andrew stood over him with his sword, ready for the final blow. The young man was in no hurry to take the life of his opponent. He was interested in motivation. As the game moved into real life, all the participants' murders became real. Therefore, it remained unclear to the guy what motivates some representatives to hunt down competitors. In this case, the motivation was obvious. Having fallen from the game world into the real world, the opponent became a terrifying monster. He lost everything he had: a normal life, family, friends. Therefore, possessed by a thirst for revenge, he switched to the side of evil. He had been living this thing for too long and had already lost touch with reality. He was only interested in destroying other players. The hunter did not want any reward for it. And now, while recounting the reasons for his own downfall, he forgot about the situation he was in. Death came to him unexpectedly for both interlocutors. Andrew stared in amazement at the Reaper's weapon sticking out of his opponent's back. The appearance of this artifact indicated that an even more dangerous enemy was nearby. And indeed, looking around in all directions, the young man saw the silhouette of a man not far away in the fog. The Reaper pulled out his scythe and greeted his opponent in his own unique manner. He had found his prey, and this time he wasn't going to let it go. Because the final blow to the hunter was not delivered by the young man, the points were divided equally between the two enemies. And although this angered Andrew, the boy understood that he should prepare for a new battle. And this time the situation seemed more complicated. After talking with his predecessor, the young man thought that this murderer's motives were roughly the same, and this irritated him beyond words. People who chose violence against others were not worthy of existence at all. But in the case of the Reaper, the situation turned out to be much worse. Unlike his predecessor, he simply loved killing others without having any reason to do so. He did not suffer from social rejection. He simply wanted to win over his competitors at any cost. The two opponents clashed in the first act of the confrontation. Andrew immediately sensed that his opponent had acquired and improved some skills during his absence. To protect himself, the schoolboy used a skill with red spikes. Some of them managed to injure their opponent and even draw first blood. A few seconds after the attacker retreated, a giant skull appeared in the sky. This was a strange phenomenon, especially when that skull opened its mouth and attacked Andrew. The speed of the attack was impressive, and the young man barely had time to dodge. He had no idea that a Reaper could possess such powerful skills, but after a few seconds he saw that he was attacked by a completely different opponent. This was a girl who was absolutely on the same side as the attacker. It turned out that during his absence on the horizon, the dangerous enemy had found accomplices. Because next to the stranger, another man emerged from the mist, who was also aggressive towards the schoolboy. Although, judging by their conversations with each other, they weren't friends either. From the appearance of the third stranger, it was obvious that he had the class of a butcher. While Andrew was lost in speculation about a possible new party of opponents, the Reaper recovered. He immediately declared to his henchmen his right to this booty, noting that their role is only to help. Having agreed among themselves on the future strategy, the opponents prepared to attack. Andrew understood that it was difficult for him to defeat even one Reaper, let alone 3 enemies. But there was nowhere to go, especially after the enemy ran towards him. The schoolboy managed to dodge the first attack, but a necromancer immediately came to the Reaper's aid. She used the bone needle skill against Andrew, so the young man had to quickly regroup and repel this blow as well. When the boy turned his attention to the girl, the silhouette of a butcher appeared behind him. As it turned out, this scoundrel did not like fair fights. The main thing for the axe murderer was the result. Andrew knew perfectly well that he wouldn't have time to dodge this time, and soon disappeared in the light of the explosion. The Reaper and the Necromancer, each with their own emotions, watched what was happening. Of course, the hunter didn't like the fact that his prey might have gone to someone else. But when the fog cleared, the excitement turned to anger. The schoolboy was not alone. One of the guild members who were monitoring the quest came to the boy's aid. He was pleased that he had made it on time. Andrew carefully studied his unexpected assistant. Judging by the skills and weapons, a warrior of a rare class landed in front of the young man. This was one of 3 dragon hunters in the country. As a rule, in the ergosphere, one could choose from 11 primary grades. And during the game, completing quests and choosing rewards, the player's nature could change. Due to the fact that the corresponding skills were upgraded in the process, class diversity developed to almost 100 types. It was precisely because of this variety of variations that the percentage of creating a dragon hunter was extremely small. But the newcomer said the same thing about Andrew himself. The assistant believed that the Avengers class was so complex that it was preferable to abandon it. But the friendly conversation and bickering had to be postponed indefinitely, because the scoundrels who were already preparing for the attack had to be finished off. The frightened butcher immediately understood from his opponent's stance what he was going to do, and he tried to warn his accomplices. But the hero's assistant's attack was extremely powerful. Therefore, it was almost impossible to protect yourself from it. All 3 suffered damage. While the attackers recovered, licking their wounds, the dragon hunter ordered Andrew to collect the reward. Thus, as in the situation with Richard, it was possible to quickly complete the quest, avoiding trouble. All the worries about Corinne, Rich, and Amanda were unfounded, because as it turned out, the dragon hunter's partner had already taken care of them. The man had the class of a monk, so he had the ability to heal wounds with a blessing. While the 2 were deciding what they should do, the Grim Reaper decided to take action. He couldn't let his victim escape from him so easily again. The attack was so unexpected that even the assistant was afraid of potential death. But his partner came to his aid. Using his own skills, the monk completely neutralized the effect of the opponent's skill. The shocked boy could only rejoice at this and cheer for the victory. Corinne ran up to Andrew, who was just standing there with his mouth open. The girl was worried about her partner and scolded herself for being away from him for so long. It was urgent to complete the quest, as my new comrades had said. Therefore, the schoolboy called up the system window and began to choose a reward. During this, the newly arrived assistants announced that they were members of a guild called Reason. They made it clear that this was not the first or last meeting with the boy and girl. The next morning, while Kelly was visiting the spa, her subordinates called with a report. And although the girl didn't really like it, she still answered the call. The monk was the first to express his opinion. He told about the last details of last night. But the guild leader was only interested in the possibility of accepting new members into the group. The man decided to announce the verdict previously agreed upon with his friend. These 2 were capable little guys. In addition, the guild member was impressed by Andrew's courage, who did not stop in the face of danger. It was clear from the young man's behavior that he was facing difficulties in real life. Because of this, he was able to develop good intuition. As a conclusion, both subordinates advocated for the earliest possible acceptance of new members into the team. Kelly, after listening to all the arguments, agreed with this decision and promised to resolve the case as soon as possible. At the end of the conversation, the monk noted that the members of the Chaos Guild had also become unusually active. This caused a lot of inconvenience and was a warning sign. The guild war no longer seemed so illusory. Kelly took note of the information and ordered that all members be informed so they could prepare. On this score, the woman had a trump card, which she decided to use. The villains had taken their step in disturbing the peace, and now they were to receive a worthy rebuff. A prisoner had been held in the abandoned building of the former laboratory for quite some time. The Chaos Guild member never broke under the pressure of his interrogators during all this time. Leo, who decided to come here today to take his place, was disappointed. In the eyes of the older woman who unexpectedly appeared in the room, the man felt like a failure. Because even torture did not help to obtain information, it seemed that the prisoner was seeking execution. Realizing that the situation is much more complicated than it seemed at first glance, Kelly decided to join the game. When the villain fell to the floor from the blow, the girl took up her weapon. She began to explain the following rules of the so-called game that could not be refused. By dealing blow after blow to the captive and periodically healing him, the woman will not let him die. Since she only had 5 healocks with her, the enemy had just as many chances to speak. The Reason Guild was interested in only 2 questions in this situation. The first is where the enemy base was located, and secondly, who in the Chaos Guild was called the boss. When the beginning of the interrogation was announced, even before the first wound was inflicted, the prisoner began to scream. And although he claimed that he knew nothing because he was considered the sixth on the team, it didn't work. Kelly deliberately dragged out the time because the wait was killing more than the process itself. She even began to threaten to use her rare skills such as poison, and the representative of the villains whimpered in fear. The interrogation promised to be interesting but long, so we had to settle into the building for the night. While the fate of competing forces was being decided in an abandoned laboratory, Corinne and Andrew went about their daily duties. They came to school. But all the boy and girl's thoughts were occupied with studying the Rezon Guild, which was distinguished by a large number of members and was one of the best groups in the ergosphere. Given recent events, the motives that guided their members were unclear. Therefore, Corin held the opinion that one must be careful at every step, especially since the Horizon test was about to begin soon with a grand reward. As always, at the most interesting moment of the conversation, the friends were interrupted by the appearance of an unwanted interlocutor. It was David himself, and he insisted on talking to Andrew. Judging by its appearance, this topic could not stand postponement or refusal. The appearance of the bully who was bullying her friend outraged Corinne. The girl was against any communication with the scoundrel, especially when he started claiming that it was none of her business. But Andrew resolutely stopped all the chatter. The guy showed that he was willing to negotiate. He didn't know what awaited him, but he definitely wasn't going to run away. From now on, he wanted to make it clear to every bully that he could defend himself perfectly well. The young man assured that all of Corin's worries about his fate were groundless. David led his classmate through the almost empty streets to the car tunnel. When both boys found themselves in complete isolation, it was time to speak frankly. The hooligan leader reported that Keith, his henchman, was hospitalized after Andrew's actions. And now, together with his parents, the villain is going to punish the young man. They are soon to file a lawsuit with the intention of imprisoning the boy for physical harm. The high school student didn't know what to say to that. It was the first time he had heard of such serious consequences of a fight. David calmly reported that it turns out that the preparatory process has been going on for several weeks, and he doesn't know for sure what stage the investigation is at. Any of the options that awaited Andrew were unfavorable for him. Corinne, who had decided to follow her friend out of fear, gritted her teeth in rage. Meanwhile, David proposed an option that could help resolve the situation. Since Keith's parents contacted the boy's father's law firm, he offered to stop all persecution of Andrew on one condition. If it is fulfilled, everything will end peacefully. The boy was required to immediately go to Keith and apologize for what he had done, getting down on his knees. Such words from the leader of the villains caused indignation in the hero. He immediately remembered all his torment from being bullied by those arrogant classmates, all the beatings he received from the giant kid almost every day. David, meanwhile, insisted on his point. He believed he had his interlocutor backed against the wall, arguing this in his head by saying that he had no right to defend himself at all. And not realizing that the young man's behavior was only a consequence of years of bullying, Andrew began to shake with rage, which he could barely contain. Seeing this reaction, the leader of the villains was unable to restrain a joyful smile. The guy mistakenly considered such a manifestation to be evidence of fear. David, with his chicken brain, could not understand that the injustice of the world also affected him. He preferred that his status as a major be reflected in all aspects of his life, and he wanted the wretched Andrew to understand their completely incomparable position relative to each other. Because in this little scoundrel's world, only money and power solved all problems, and his interlocutor had neither the first nor the second. That's why Andrew's negative and categorical response made David's brain explode. The young man did not want to apologize to anyone. Moreover, he preferred the opposite to happen. In this situation, he was the victim of unjustified bullying. And in addition to their personal enmity, Corinne almost got caught in the act, and he could not forgive anyone for the attempt on his life, his only friend. That is why Andrew did not want to interfere with or stop any lawsuits regarding this situation. There was a short pause during which David tried to think of a way out of the situation. In the end, he began to be oppressed not by a sense of self-respect, but by a sense of responsibility for his loved ones. But it seemed that this was not an argument at all for the interlocutor. According to Andrew, the entire situation will become known during the investigation, not just the latest events, because of which precisely everyone who obeyed David will suffer, and not vice versa. Not wanting to continue this pointless dialogue any longer, The hero turned towards the exit from the tunnel, but the loss could not remain on the side of the villain. Therefore, heavy artillery was used. David said with a predatory smile that if it became public, it would be Megan who would suffer the most. It seems that the woman will be most affected by her brother's shameful reputation in the eyes of society, because despite all the tragedies in their family, she did everything for Andrew's good life. And he in turn turned into an absolute worthless person. The hero instantly turned 180 degrees. It turns out that a former childhood friend knew the entire story of his family's losses, and despite this, he was on the side of the offenders. Andrew could no longer restrain himself. He grabbed his interlocutor by the breasts and pressed him against the wall. He wanted to finally hear the truth from a person who had once been important to him. But despite their relationship, she remained aloof and did not stop the bullying, especially since David was not just a member of the gang but a full-fledged leader. Corinne also barely held back her emotions, but she understood that the guy had to untie this knot on his own. Watching Andrew's completely sincere emotions of anger, the scoundrel only smiled in return. He saw absolutely no reason or circumstances under which he should have stood up for the young man, because only in the hero's opinion were they once friends. Only Andrew considered their relationship close. David himself always perceived the boy as inferior to him, even in deep childhood, because with his mother's milk he absorbed arrogance and an imaginary golden spoon in his mouth. He had everything from a young age, unlike the person he was talking to. Andrew didn't even have parents who could protect him, which was a good thing to take advantage of. In this conversation, for the first time in his life, the young man learned about the rich man's true attitude towards him. Watching him draw an analogy between their relationship and the friendship between the guy and Corinne, he couldn't believe that he had once believed in the kindness of the bully's soul standing before him. David hinted that the girl perceives Andrew as a toy, and as long as she was interested, their relationship continued, because in reality there was a chasm separating them. In the Major's opinion, such trash as the hero and his sister was not worth paying attention to at all. Another mention of family sent Andrew's emotions from disappointment to rage in a second. He himself did not understand how his fist ended up in the face of his interlocutor. Confused, David, not expecting such a turn of events, found himself on the ground in an instant. In fact, the hero was not going to get his hands dirty because of such a scoundrel. The rose-colored glasses he had worn for many years regarding past friendships shattered into shards. He didn't expect anything from his interlocutor, especially since he didn't want to fight him. But the leader of the hooligans could not allow himself to be humiliated like that. So I had to teach him a lesson again, properly. The blow was so powerful that the opponent's eyes lit up with stars. At this moment, Andrew promised one thing to both himself and his opponent. He wanted to reach heights that David had never even dreamed of and show what he was truly capable of. Still angry, the hero walked through the dark streets of the city. He reflected on what had happened, sadly saying goodbye to his fond memories. Suddenly, Corinne's finger rested on his neck. She imitated a gunshot to get the young man's attention. A casual conversation ensued. The girl did not want to say that she was present during the conversation with David, but she couldn't help but be curious about their former friendship. Corinne admitted that she was forced to eavesdrop out of anxiety. The beauty hurried to apologize for her impudence, but the guy didn't expect that from her. He understood her motives perfectly well, but was focused on his own deep feelings. As it turned out, the boys went to the same school from the very beginning. They played together every day when they were kids, like best friends. But in high school, everything changed when cooler options appeared. Eventually, the popularity of other classmates took over David's attention. In Corinne's opinion, the Major was an idiot for losing such a worthy friend. After an awkward silence, the girl decided to offer something interesting. She assumed that Andrew didn't have any special plans for tonight. Therefore, she gladly invited him to visit her. The young man was shocked. He did not expect such a turn of events. Corinne began to blush and feel embarrassed because of the unnecessary questions. Suddenly angry, the girl shouted that the young man would have ramen and a solution to the lawsuit. She didn't want any objections to this, so she insisted on her proposal. Since they were on the same side in the game, they had to move together in life, because otherwise you could forget about Horizon. Around the same time, somewhere in the center of the city, a Black Reaper walked, accompanied by a necromancer and a butcher. He was bound and blindfolded. These were the terms of the morning's agreement for a meeting with the leader of Chaos, which have now changed slightly. When the group arrived at the location, they only agreed to remove the blindfold, but the elder, who was nearby, unexpectedly ordered the Reaper to be released completely. It was the president of the Chaos Guild, and he was interested in talking to such a strong potential adept. According to rumors, this man had the class of an emperor, although no outsider had ever seen his face. So the Reaper was eager to learn such a great secret. A few minutes later, the guest was already alone in the living room with the owner of the house. He was dissatisfied that the boss of the Chaos Guild seemed unwilling to get to the heart of the matter, because in fact, first and foremost, this meeting was his initiative. Now it seemed that the whole conversation was descending into some kind of mockery. So, to draw attention to the main point, the Reaper decided to start by threatening his interlocutor. To be honest, the player didn't see the point in keeping any contractual obligations, because it was the first time they had ever met this person. But it was this trait of the Reaper's character that attracted the attention of the leader of the Chaos Guild. Colin struck him as a surprisingly canonical thief who fit well into their organization. Before the player arrived here, painstaking work was carried out on his dossier. Now Chaos knew everything, and this made the high school student incredibly angry. The killer wanted only one thing: to protect himself and kill anyone who could harm him. But his actions only amused the guild boss. He felt no fear of the Grim Reaper, for he had a significant advantage in strength. For example, now, without even moving from his place, he could tame the little rascal. With the help of skill, the owner of the house put the guest on his knees. And when he completely stopped his opponent, he approached him with a smile. Unlike the schoolboy, the leader of Chaos had a clearly formed plan to conquer the world. And he, perfectly understanding Colin's potential, decided to show the guy his place. Because it was the impulsive actions that guided the boy that showed his immaturity. Therefore, according to the husband's conviction, the Reaper had to agree to the terms of the contract. If executed, the killer will learn to act outside the game matrix. Learn to open any door and defeat enemies without any special effort. Since it was not coercion, Colin retained the right to a say in deciding his own future. About an hour had passed since the meeting on the street, and now Andrew was already on the other side of the city. The young man first set foot in a house in one of the elite districts of the capital. The girl asked the guest for a couple of minutes to change clothes and disappeared into her room. Meanwhile, the hero looked at the new location more closely. He was delighted. Feeling like a hero from some TV series, the schoolboy slowly walked through the rooms of the luxurious apartments. Seeing a family portrait on the wall, the boy immediately curiously approached it. The girl really hadn't changed much. The main difference could be considered to be her hair, and now it became obvious how lonely Corinne had been in her life. She was left to herself almost all the time. Her parents, busy with their own career ambitions, never gave her a brother or sister. Right now, being nearby, the guy actually became interested in his girlfriend's inner world. She was indeed incredibly rich, but nevertheless risked her life in the game every day. The motivation for such actions was incomprehensible to the guy and raised many questions. But he would really like to know what's really going on in the beauty's head. When the meal was over, it was time for conversation. Corinne was pleased with her friend's arrival and sincerely wanted to create a favorable atmosphere. And the girl's frankness confused the young man, causing a shy blush. To somehow get out of an embarrassing situation for himself, the young man wanted to start cleaning. But the landlady was categorically against it. She didn't want Andrew to burden himself with work. The appearance of Corinne washing dishes did not fit the schoolboy's idea of the life of this family. Having inspected the house a little earlier, the schoolboy assumed that there was a whole gang of servants here. But when this comment was made out loud, the beauty seemed incredibly indignant. She didn't want to hear comparisons with ordinary majors, thus creating a gap between the girl and the rest of society. She would prefer that Andrew see her as his equal, an ordinary girl, his friend, the same Corinne who had his back more than once. Remembering the conversation between David and the young man, she now felt ashamed of her privileged position. But I was tormented by the inability to correctly express my own opinion on this matter. Eventually, the internal struggle gave way to a sense of justice. Corinne declared that David's words were disgusting and did not fit her worldview. At that moment, Andrew finally understood the reason for such kind behavior towards him today. It turns out that his girlfriend was triggered by words that were an empty sound to him. The schoolboy knew perfectly well her true attitude towards him. She has repeatedly demonstrated generosity and selflessness through her actions. Willingness to always fight for justice and come to the rescue when needed. In Andrew's eyes, Corinne was a heroine no less, and he decided to make the girl understand this once and for all. There was no place for arrogance or superficiality in their friendship. The young man perfectly saw the depth of his interlocutor. Such a sincere and wordy speech this time made the hostess herself blush. Shyness, out of habit, within a few seconds turned into an angry outburst. But the guy already perceived such a standard reaction as usual, with understanding. Any conversation with a complimentary direction between them ended in staged scandals. Corinne simply didn't know how to take good words at her own expense. After a long and unpleasant day, David finally returned home, looking gloomy. The appearance of his father in the lobby of the apartment complex confused the young man. He was a rare guest, because there was no trusting relationship between him and his son. Seeing the boy, the elder came closer, examining the abrasions on his face. He didn't come empty-handed, but with a gift from David's grandmother. This was an excuse to control the independent life of his son, who was considered not worthy enough for a family. And now, observing the traces of beatings, the father began to worry. This indicated troubles that would soon need to be resolved with money and connections. And the elder was already tired of digging up the consequences of his descendants' bad behavior. From an early age, he couldn't control himself and disgraced the family name on which he was the only stain. Without waiting for a clear answer to his own questions, the father left without intending to visit his son. Finally, the man officially announced that he was removing himself from possible problems. He wanted David to finally learn to take responsibility for his own actions. In case of irreparable difficulties, he was ready to transfer the boy to another educational institution, or send him abroad so he can start from scratch. But the young man didn't even dare to count on anything more. To somehow relieve the emotional tension from meeting his father, David decided to immerse himself in the game. This world of unspeakable cruelty and adventure gave the boy a false sense of control over his own life. Here he could always fulfill his darkest desires and quell his rage. Today, after completing another quest, the guy unexpectedly met another player. The competitor recoiled in fear when he saw the crossbow aimed in his direction. And only when David pulled his weapon away did the young man swallow with joy that he was not facing a hunter. It seemed that the prospect of meeting a killer on one of the quests incredibly frightened the newcomer, and it was precisely because of fear that his mouth would not shut. And the major had no desire to make new acquaintances, so he showed indifference with his whole appearance. Realizing that chatter was useless in this situation, the stranger suddenly laughed. Although the contact didn't go exactly as planned, the outcome could still have been satisfactory. After waiting for the interlocutor to turn his back to him, the villain took out his knives and attacked. He was counting on the surprise effect, which immediately failed. David's deadly counterattack knocked him back. But the bully wasn't going to stop there, so he activated the executioner's skill. The vile competitor, barely recovering from the fall, went numb. It was just that inexorable death was rapidly heading his way. This time, the robbery trick proved fatal for the trickster. And even though the boy didn't beg for mercy. No matter how much I reminded you that killing another player changes your class to play killer, David didn't care. He wanted blood. When it was all over, nothing was left of the competitor. The system immediately responded to the violation and imposed restrictions on the use of some game features. If he received penalty points again for this reason, the young man would submit to chaos. These messages would have been alarming to anyone but an angry mob leader. Today, his entire day was the quintessence of brazen losers who didn't understand their place. Therefore, the appearance of a stranger behind his back was once again regarded as an act of attack. But everything turned out to be much stranger. The man was not going to fight. He was admiring the player's behavior. After a short pause, the stranger announced with a sly smile that he had an offer. Despite the threats of his interlocutor, he continued calmly, hinting at a deeper acquaintance, which David didn't quite understand and therefore immediately attacked. But to his surprise, the boy did not see the victim in front of him. The stranger had already disappeared from sight. Once behind the young man, the man introduced himself. He was a recruiter for the Chaos Guild named Eugene. Since the candidate's talents could be seen with the naked eye, an interview was offered. After receiving a sharp refusal, the stranger decided to interest David with new information. He talked about the upcoming competition called Horizon and the cash prize, and that players can bring their own characters into real life. After a few seconds of hesitation, the bully remembered Andrew's sudden transformation. When everything fell into place, Eugene suggested taking the test on Chaos Island. After passing a tough competitive selection and completing the task, David had to find out more details. Realizing that it was thanks to the new information that he had interested the interlocutor, the recruiter no longer doubted that he would soon appear on the horizon again, so I decided to just leave without wasting any more time. Such an unexpected, fateful meeting caused an explosion in the head of the leader of the hooligans. He realized that the scoundrel Andrew had actually been cheating all this time. In the morning, good news appeared for the hero almost immediately. The girl managed to talk to her sister, a lawyer, and she promised to take up the matter if necessary. According to the relative, Andrew was not in any danger if the entire situation was clarified and there were witnesses. From that moment on, the boy could breathe freely, no longer worrying about the fate of his own family. Although he had acted so confidently with David the day before, in reality, the young man was very nervous. As they approached the school, their friends noticed something unusual. A fancy sports car was parked near the main entrance. They didn't have time to even make any guesses about this, because Kelly and Leo were already heading towards the school children, greeting them in a friendly manner. Guild leader Reason radiated goodwill from every cell of her body. The boy and girl didn't have to guess long who was standing in front of them. Because of the recent events that had happened to them, the answer was obvious. Representatives of a serious group of players came to them with an offer. Confirming her suspicions, Kelly suggested skipping class for a productive conversation. She agreed to show potential newcomers all the benefits of guild membership. Therefore, I immediately invited them to visit Rezan's base. As the school children raced through the city streets in the car, Corinne's thoughts about the purpose of the trip changed. She couldn't understand how they had agreed to the stranger's proposal. It was so suspicious that the girl feared being killed somewhere in a deserted place. But although Andrew agreed that new acquaintances knew too much about them, he also understood if they wanted to kill them, they would have done it earlier and not bothered anyone. The chance to listen to representatives of the Rezan Guild didn't come around so often that it could be neglected. Sometime later, the boy and girl were already walking through the corridors of the giant building. Kelly announced that she wanted to hold a meeting for the school children with the group members, but asked the candidates' permission. It was agreed that the conversation would take place in a private location. To avoid being distracted by strangers and not attracting unnecessary attention, Corinne felt more and more tension inside her. And the young man, immediately noticing this, tried to find out the reasons. It turned out that the girl had already been here with her family before, and she knew Rezan's base well. Almost every vacation they spent at a local spa. Taking the elevator to the top floor, Kelly and Leo led the newcomers to one of the rooms. Opening the door, the woman politely invited the schoolchildren to come inside. It turned out that a bunch of players were already eagerly waiting for them there. Andrew couldn't understand why there were so few guild members. And Kelly was quick to explain that not all game characters were able to be brought to life. No one knew the reason why this happened, but of course this question interested everyone present. The only thing Rezan managed to find out was that everyone present was in the top 100 of the game. Although there are still strong players who haven't had such an opportunity yet, Andrew and Corinne's surprise ended after the guild leader's remark, because they were also on this list. She was able to see perfectly well, thanks to her skill, detailed information about the abilities and rank of the newcomers. And I was really impressed by the young man's results, even though he had never participated in team competitions. He, seemingly without any desire to improve his own level, reached the 89th step of the table. Some of the guild members did not share the woman's enthusiasm. Now the experience of battles with players was important, which apparently Andrew didn't have, as he tried to compete only with monsters. One of the observers stood up for the boy, telling about the young man's confrontation with the killer. Defeating the play killer one-on-one aroused incredible interest. The monk was sure that in this case all past performance should not worry anyone. The main qualities were intelligence, creativity, and intuition. Suddenly, Corinne intervened in the elder's conversation, completely losing sight of the purpose of the dialogue. She demanded an explanation for the reason for their arrival at the Rezan Guild base. The girl only now finally understood that instead of murder, they were offered admission. Kelly laughed merrily, finally understanding the young lady's strange behavior. She talked about her plans and how classes of school children could perfectly complement the casts. The Rezan Guild was ready to expand by 2 more people. Because they were conducting serious preparations before the main event of the game, the Horizon, Kelly believed that such an offer was also very profitable for the boy and the girl. Their party most likely will not be able to cope with the test on its own, and besides, the guild could share all the knowledge it had already gained about the game and quests, not to mention the additional opportunities that could only be obtained through adulthood. For example, monetary rewards or treatment for serious injuries in combat. It was quite a good job. The main thing in which was collective defense against evil, so that each of the players felt safe, because the Chaos Guild had too many enemies. and they were difficult to deal with unless you were working in a large team of like-minded people. Play killers sought to prevent adequate players from advancing and making progress. They sought to eliminate anyone who might hinder them on their dark path. After completing the introductory speech, the guild leader reasonably asked about the decision of the interlocutors. The woman was eager to hear an affirmative answer and end everything on a pleasant note. Andrew, to be honest, didn't know what answer to give. He carefully considered the pros and cons. Corinne broke the silence by asking how, in that case, the rewards for the main quest would be distributed. Of course, this was the main stumbling block in this story. Kelly reported that the guild would divide all money equally, just like the wishes, one for all. The schoolgirl didn't like the answer, so it was important for her to find out what would be done with them if they refused. As it turned out, no one wanted to kill them now. But after that, in the future, it's better for them not to meet on the battlefield. The guild wanted to win, and if they failed, they would become competitors. This time, Corinne hesitated in making her decision. She didn't know how best to do it. With such allies, victory was clearly on the horizon. But the reward was lost. Relying only on each other, they might not achieve what they wanted at all. Suddenly, Andrew's voice cut through the girl's thoughts. The young man resolutely disagreed with the offer of admission. Everyone in the room sighed in surprise, and an awkward silence fell. The guy explained that for him and Corinne, the desire for a party on the horizon was extremely important, and they weren't going to share it with anyone, let alone give it away. At this time, in the eyes of some of the members of Reason, Andrew earned respect. Kelly, nevertheless, trying to convince the young man, asked what exactly they wanted to accomplish. And he responded with the words of Corinne, who, having once joked, came out as complete nonsense. The schoolboy understood perfectly well that this wish was a wild fantasy that even sounded stupid. But this did not negate the very fact of the existence of some purpose. Corinne, hearing her friend's words, rushed at him with her fists. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Andrew had just embarrassed them in front of famous players. But the hero stopped her with a remark that the girl had her own desire, even if she didn't name it. And this indicated that both of them could not walk the same path with the Reason Guild. Leo, who was beginning to feel like he was in some kind of madhouse, took the floor. He wanted to do it right away, to teach a lesson to the little rascals who had ruined their precious time. Kelly considered her friend's words and agreed to the proposal. The man was seriously angry, and Andrew subconsciously hid Corinne behind his back, stepping forward. Leo had the class of a spiritual warrior with a rank far greater than that of a young man. But this did not scare the hero at all. He was ready to fight to the end. The situation was heating up, but no one was going to stop the confrontation. Finally, the spirit warrior activated the bear paw skill and prepared to strike. Corinne couldn't stand to watch this and tried to stop the hot-tempered elder. But Kelly assured the girl that this would not happen. The rules of the Reason Guild were to hunt down competitors and eliminate them from the game. That didn't mean they were killing players. But the goal was to suppress the opponent to such a level that he would no longer compete. And although it was not in the guild's power to force competitors to refuse to complete quests, they did everything possible to ensure that they no longer posed a threat to them. Andrew was not at all pleased with such prospects, especially given the pressure Kelly continued to exert to agree to their entry. Therefore, he still categorically refused to re-announce the announced proposals. But he decided to put forward his own conditions for the upcoming fight. In the event of his victory, the Reason Guild had to promise to join the Corin party, without any objections or complaints, and in the event of his defeat, the students undertake to take a similar step. This was the only option, in the young man's opinion, to fairly resolve this conflict of interest. He was not going to bend under the pressure of more influential competitors. Whoever they were in life or in the game, there were no authorities for the boy in this room. Corin, having listened to her friend's conditions, completely agreed with them, for she had given her word to support him. Although she didn't like the plan of fighting stronger opponents, she preferred to preserve her pride. Kelly, laughing, agreed to the schoolchildren's conditions. The woman did not believe at all in the victory of the impudent children. Although they seemed confident in their abilities, she believed that she would not lose control of the situation. But at any moment he will turn it back to reason. It was decided to hold the duel at the guild's training base. No limits or additional artifacts were allowed to be used during the fight. And to prevent the death of one of the players, the woman allowed the use of a healing doll. This Hilka could restore up to 15% health when the fighter was completely on the verge of collapse. This condition was quite acceptable to Corinne, who was worried about the fate of her comrade. The destruction of this artifact after activation was supposed to serve as the finale of the duel. Not only was the item available to improve health indicators. Among those present was a very powerful healer named Ben. Having dealt with the organizational issues, Kelly allowed the participants to start the fight at their own discretion, and Andrew immediately activated his sword. Leo decided to name his class, but the young man already understood perfectly well who was standing in front of him. And if the enemy tried to intimidate him with this, it was in vain. The hero rushed into the attack first, and although his movements were quite agile, Leo easily defended himself from every attack. The first step was an attempt to assess the opponent's capabilities. Andrew's strategy was to bombard the man with attacks from all sides, keeping him at a distance. But unexpectedly, he suffered a powerful blow to the jaw with the help of a spirit warrior skill. Despite a bunch of blows, Leo gave in to catch the guy. Activating his werewolf claws, this time the guild member Reason pulled the blanket over himself. Now Andrew had to withstand an endless stream of attacks. As soon as the young man seemed to understand his opponent's strategy, he made an unexpected attack. Getting kicked in the face was, of course, even more unpleasant than just getting punched. But that was no reason to give up, so Andrew regrouped. Leo was so absorbed in his own movements that he failed to notice one important detail. During his frantic attack, he himself was wounded. As it turned out, the schoolboy had the same skills as his more experienced opponent. This made guild member Rezon treat the boy more carefully. Reassessment of the situation influenced further actions. Suddenly, Leo disappeared from sight. Of course, he ended up within his opponent's blind spot and attacked Andrew from behind, but he reacted in time. The boy's counterattack was not successful because just as Leo could attack, he could also retreat quickly. In the schoolboy's opinion, this was a rather strange step that he did not fully understand. But after a few seconds, everything fell into place. The opponent summoned a spiritual warrior. He rushed forward, planning an attack from the mountain. The hero decided to retreat while simultaneously contemplating further actions. But it was too slow. A second later, Leo's fist hit him in the face again. The schoolboy lost his balance for a moment. But realizing that he needed to hold on, he began to block the opponent's next series of attacks. It was a tough fight, from which it was impossible to emerge victorious if everything was left as it is. Andrew felt like he was losing focus. There seemed to be no logic in the enemy's strategy. He used unrelated techniques. Therefore, the hero decided to do the same, to the surprise of the audience. Holding the sword in one hand, the young man struck Leo in the jaw with the other. From surprise, the opponent lost control of his body and fell to the floor. The guy's trick worked perfectly. He learned by sight. Although he understood that for a spiritual warrior, the power in his hands was not enough. It was more of a surprise effect that worked. An oppressive silence fell in the training pavilion. In the end, Leo acted like an adult and acknowledged that the young man had made a brilliant strategic maneuver. Understanding that every second is a chance for your opponent to come up with a new approach, Andrew decided to attack again. With the same combined variation, the young technician tried to maintain the initiative. And at some point, when Leo seemed to have calculated the schoolboy's next actions, he changed something. Using a skill that enhanced his attack, he punched the man in the face. It was an unpleasant surprise, but not enough to cause fatal damage. Although his guildmates had already begun to notice that their representative was losing his leadership position in the duel. The very fact that Andrew used his fist-fighting skills still confused his opponent. It was so unconventional that for some reason it didn't fit Leo's head. He was lost before each attack of the young man because he could not guess what kind of blow it would be, which gave the hero a time advantage of a few seconds. And while the guy was impressively putting pressure on his opponent, he was receiving more injuries. Every attempt to seize the initiative ended in failure. Leo was losing the rhythm of the fight and could not find a foothold to turn the tide of the fight. In the end, Andrew waited for the right moment to deliver a powerful blow and move on to the final stage. The strategy was so successful that impotent rage was visible on the opponent's face. When it seemed like everything was over, Andrew added a dexterity boost, and he began to circle around his opponent from different sides, depriving him of the ability to move. The audience immediately understood that the consequence of this behavior was building an ideal battle strategy. This confirmed the monk's theory that past experience in the game was completely unimportant. Andrew was so smart that he could quickly navigate extreme situations and turn them to your own advantage. Currently, Leo was under extreme pressure, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When the rapid attack suddenly stopped, the man fell to the floor, breathing a sigh of relief. Corinne immediately tensed up. She didn't understand what was happening. But Kelly warned with a sly smile that this was not the end of the battle. It turned out that all this time a member of their guild had been preparing for something. The schoolgirl took this news with great concern. Raison exuded treachery. Unexpectedly, Andrew also saw that Leo's aura began to change. Flaming lightning bolts began to fly around the man, and he slowly rose to his feet. The hero immediately recognized the spiritual warrior's ultimatum skill. This meant that the enemy had called upon divine power for help. Corinne, unpleasantly shocked, immediately rushed to her partner's defense. But according to guild members, Leo did not break any rules. Quite the opposite. Activating this skill meant that Andrew was taken seriously from the very beginning. In any case, such changes could be fatal for a schoolchild. From now on, the next 5 attacks were extremely powerful and blocked the opponent's passive skills. The hero immediately began to think about how to save his life 5 steps ahead. Leo gradually approached, threatening violence. The first blow almost knocked the boy's spirit out. The schoolboy flew several meters and hit his back against the wall of the building. Of course he bled. Meanwhile, the striker decided not to delay and add 2 more strikes to the pile. The audience had the impression that nothing would be left of Andrew as a result of such actions. But despite all the power of the enemy's force, the young man's endurance was enviable. He even found the strength to increase the distance between himself and Leo at the right moment. The hero understood perfectly well that it was inappropriate to use his main skill with swords now. It was necessary to somehow force the opponent to waste 2 of his powerful blows. The idea that appeared in the boy's brain turned out to be effective. But there was no time to think. The 4th attack was already approaching. Even Leo was surprised by the choice of opponent, who tried to establish a protective barrier between them. It was a completely pointless attempt. No defense could withstand such increased pressure. This was confirmed by the flight trajectory of the schoolboy's body. This time, the young man, unable to hold back, screamed in pain. Kelly smiled contentedly, predicting that Corinne would lose the party. The Raison Guild is only 1 blow away from victory, and most likely the impudent young man will not be able to cope with this. Leo flew towards the enemy at high speed. At the same time, in a familiar motion, he pointed his hand at the guy's face. Suddenly, the sound of a sword falling to the floor echoed throughout the training pavilion. The shocked spectators froze, unable to look away. The attacker himself did not immediately understand what had happened. The schoolboy, who had always seemed like a boy to be beaten, stopped his blow with his palm. With the help of the damage absorption skill that Andrew saved for last, the tide of the battle changed. Surprised, Leo backed away to a safe distance from his opponent. With the help of the absorption skill, the hero could now repay the opponent with the same coin. The schoolboy resolutely walked towards guild member Raison. He described the simplicity of his plan and how Leo personally helped to implement it. Now that the opponent's advantage was over, Andrew planned an attack using the ricochet skill. The spiritual warrior's ultimatum returned to its owner, magnified several times. The entire training base was illuminated by a bright light, and Leo flew to the opposite wall. At first it seemed that the man had lost consciousness, but the next moment everyone heard his moans of pain. This prompted Kelly to use the doll healer. When the matter was completed and she disappeared, the battle could be considered over. Andrew, in a calm tone, was the first to break the silence that had settled in the hall. Hearing her friend's voice, Corinne, forgetting everything in the world, rushed to him. The girl was incredibly happy about their victory. Only now could she admit that she actually believed in her friend's abilities. Until this moment, the schoolgirls were still filled with doubts about the possibilities of their party. While the friends talked among themselves, Kelly, together with her subordinates, tried to come up with a plan of action. Of course, the woman did not expect her opponents to win and now hoped that they would change their minds. In everything else, it was possible to compromise and reach an agreement. But if Andrew decides to push to the end, the little brats would have to be dealt with. Before discussing the fulfillment of the conditions, it was necessary to complete the treatment of the participants in the duel. Healer Ben carefully fulfilled his duties. For the first time, Andrew felt the power of a properly leveled healer. Thanks to his membership in the Raison Guild, he managed to advance to the rank of Angel. And Andrew finally realized that he was not guilty of anything before David's party. Kelly immediately rushed to ask her opponent's opinions on the agreement. And although the woman had a friendly smile on her face, inside she was like a taut string. Further events depended solely on the decision of the students. Corinne was the first to respond, proposing other terms of the contract. After talking with her friend, she agreed to change the guild's name to honor her slaves, and the consent of each member to have their name tattooed on their bodies. Of course, the interlocutors could not agree with such childish demands. Therefore, in contrast, Andrew offered his vision of solving the situation. He wanted to create an alliance of aid between the guild and the party. The guy understood that any attack on the integrity of the guild would cause war, and he did not want that. Instead, the schoolboy offered a win-win solution to the problem. And although both teams understood that this was a temporary milestone in their activities, none of them were afraid of the upcoming confrontation in the final test. The hero's self-confidence increasingly won over Kelly. The woman could not understand where he came from. But deep down I still took note of the future of the most obvious enemy. Regarding the alliance, all the conditions suited both parties, so the proposal was accepted. The former rivals shook hands, after which contact information was to be exchanged for ease of communication. Corin immediately intervened in this process with incomprehensible claims towards the woman. In fact, the girl was jealous of her friend and didn't want to share him with anyone, so it was decided to communicate only through her to avoid unnecessary trouble. Leo, in turn, decided to provide free advice about the dangers of the Chaos Guild. Even some of the platform's strongest players were eliminated by these scoundrels. Therefore, the man advised the boy to avoid direct confrontations and immediately collect his quest rewards. At the end of the conversation, it was decided to meet one of these days for dinner and discuss the latest information. When one of the strongest guilds left the building, Corinne was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. She was pleased with the outcome of today's adventures, even though it had been quite an exciting ordeal. To avoid unnecessary problems, the friends decided to level up their own levels and skills. This would help them immensely in the final battle against powerful opponents. Meanwhile, the promised test on Chaos Island was rapidly gaining momentum. The candidates fought fiercely with each other, but the undisputed leader was Eugene's protégé, David. The young man seemed to easily stand up to the most powerful of competitors, and no matter how much they united against him, everything turned out to be in vain. The future play killers were too weak against the accumulated anger of the unloved rich man. The guy was like lightning, he avoided any ambushes, and thanks to his devastating skills, he inflicted irreparable damage on his opponents. In the end, as Eugene had hoped, David was left alone on Chaos Island. The recruiter happily watched the young man from afar along with his boss. Now the schoolboy only had to reach the top of the tower. The extremely fast result of this candidate gave rise to hope for a new worthy representative of the clan. Having received the final instructions from the boss, Eugene finally understood the next plan of action. All that remained was to wait for the boy to fulfill all the conditions of the test. A few days later, the promised dinner between the guild members and Corinne's party was agreed upon. Kelly arrived first and immediately began asking about the history of how the boy and girl met. Andrew, without further ado, told everything as it was. The guy saw no point in hiding anything. All players who entered reality were forced to unite into groups, and the Rezon Guild was no exception. Those who remained within the gaming helmets never learned about this event. Eventually, after the transfer, the computer version of the world gradually became completely unimportant. Gradually, other members of the group joined the conversation. Thus began a closer acquaintance between the players. For example, a girl named Daisy had an extraordinary life story. It turned out that before the transfer, she had been in a terrible accident. As a result, she completely lost the ability to move without a wheelchair. It was an incurable diagnosis, and it seemed like life was finally over at such a young age. Thanks to the transfer of the game to reality, these terrible injuries instantly disappeared. This practice could indicate the extremely powerful influence of the ergosphere on the human brain. This was just an assumption that could not be proven without a thorough scientific approach. But if the conjectures are true, a world in which pain outweighs happiness could finally be changed. From this dialogue, Andrew finally understood the goals of the Rezon Guild. They wanted to change the world and clarify the issues of the ergosphere. After some of the secrets were revealed, Kelly decided to find out something interesting for herself. The woman asked about the black doors that could appear during some quests. Secretly, she dreamed that the young man would still be able to see these portals. And, fortunately, Corinne confirmed her suspicions. This indicated that the schoolboy was much more valuable than had been assumed during the duel. Information about these portals emerged in the Rezon Guild during the interrogation of Chaos members. They insisted that this was a transition to a new level of play, not accessible to everyone. Assuming that the entire process is tied to brain activity, this could be a manifestation of the enlightened. Several days have passed since the informative dinner, during which time the friends managed to complete a couple of quests. Today's challenge seemed extremely easy and did not promise extraordinary rewards. Corinne decided to use the new skills she gained from previous playthroughs starting today. She was already quite skilled at working in pairs, and could sense the right moment for her partner to intervene. Andrew, in turn, never let the girl down and diligently carried out his part of the plan. And now, thanks to the Ring of Inevitability, he increased his attack level and flew at the spider. Obviously, the monster couldn't withstand that pressure. When the creature was finished, Andrew remembered the conversation about monsters appearing through back doors. According to colleagues, anomalies could occur due to such portals. For example, a modified agile wolf, or in general, monsters that never existed in the game. And if this had already happened to the young man several times, he needed to be more careful. But be attentive to your own changes, because most likely such anomalies affected the players themselves. It was necessary to train one's own consciousness so that the test of the horizon did not turn out to be a deadly experience. When the last spider was finished, the young man and the girl immediately received a notification from the system. They were congratulated on successfully completing the quest quickly. This time, the team was lucky not to encounter any anomalies on their way, so the battle seemed easy. And thanks to new skills and artifacts, they didn't even have time to take damage. Since the system also noticed this, players were invited to take part in an additional test. For passing, they promised some special reward, different from ordinary material goods. It was the first time Corinne had encountered such proposals, and she didn't really like them. But Andrew, in turn, saw prospects in this. The unknown nature of the award did not scare the guy at all. He assumed that it was somehow connected with the horizon. Therefore, deciding not to discuss this topic any further, the guy agreed to the test. For the young man, information regarding the main quest was more valuable than money, especially in the context of the fact that other players and even guilds were in the same position of uncertainty. So any data could be profitably sold or exchanged for something important to you. Corinne, having heard her friend's point of view, nevertheless agreed with him. Fortunately, the additional test did not begin immediately. Remembering the first monster, Andrew was glad that he would encounter the unknown at night, when there were no people around. After lingering near the school after classes, the young man unexpectedly met Donna. A conversation ensued between the girl and the boy, during which the schoolboy learned something suspicious. It turns out that David hasn't been to class for many days. So rumors began to circulate around the school that the rich were transferring. Teachers discussed his father's efforts to get the bully into a prestigious school. Andrew took this news as a villain's step towards surrender. He was glad that he and David would never see each other again. At the specified time, the hero and his girlfriend teleported to one of the city's districts to a playground. This time, the area was familiar to them because it was near the school. The system began the countdown almost immediately. The conditions for passing were to destroy the 8 exiled princes of the Ashen Kingdom in 15 minutes. The indication of time limits, of course, irritated the comrades, but it was not critical. More worrying was the possible appearance of anomalies instead of ordinary monsters. Andrew and Corinne decided to take care of their own training. They needed to increase their speed. While the guy was choosing additional buffs, the beauty remembered the story of the Ashen Kingdom from the game. But I didn't have time to tell it because the countdown was over and there was no more time for chatter. The friends decided to split up to quickly complete the required number of goals. Soon, the first of the exiled princes loomed on the horizon. Andrew immediately rushed forward. He didn't want to waste time. With the help of an update to one of the sword-related skills, his attack power has been significantly increased. Because of this, the monster, before he even realized what had happened, was already cut in half. The guy immediately reported what happened to Corinne, and they stayed in touch by phone. A few seconds passed and another enemy caught the young man's eye again. This time the prince had time to react because he also saw the enemy, but the monster was too weak for a long confrontation. So Andrew already has 2 destroyed targets on his account. Inspired by such quick results, Corinne carefully sought out her prey. But she wasn't so lucky at the beginning. Suddenly, upset by her own results, the girl saw 3 monsters in front of her. The Maze Master was quite happy about such potential prey, and although the villains immediately grouped against her and took out weapons, it was all in vain. Today, the schoolgirl was able to neutralize them with a couple of tricks. Protecting herself from the blow with a protective barrier, the girl trapped the monsters. And when the monsters were securely fixed, I activated the Minotaur skill. This allowed the wand to be transformed into a deadly, fiery spear. Armed and dangerous, Corinne rushed forward. 3 targets were eliminated in a few seconds without harm to themselves. The party already had 5 princes on its account. In his joy, Andrew miscalculated the number of murders he had committed, and he ordered his friend to look for another enemy who was wandering the streets nearby. This type of monster was not capable of hiding, so this made the task easier. Running through the blocks, the young man asked the system about the time available to complete the mission. It turned out that the group still had a full 12 minutes. This was more than enough to overcome what the hero believed was the last obstacle. Most of the remaining time was spent searching. Suddenly, around the next corner, Andrew finally saw a monster. After reporting the find to Corin, the young man prepared to complete the quest. He cut his opponent in 2 using one of his new skills. But to the boy's surprise, nothing happened after that. The system did not notify that the reward needed to be collected and did not congratulate the completion of the test. Moreover, the timer was still counting down. Upon receiving the request, the program immediately responded that the task was not fully completed, and this indicated an error in the calculations. There was one more enemy left, who appeared from the black door that materialized opposite Andrew. The schoolboy was confused. This intensified when the prince began to talk about the horizon, some dreamy utopia he was seeking. But in a moment, before the surprised boy's eyes, the enemy began to change. The prince of the Ashen Kingdom turned into water, and that prompted Andrew to ask Corinne to tell the full story of this milestone game. But realizing that strange things were happening, she ran to help, simultaneously sharing the information. According to legend, all the princes left their own kingdom to find a utopia called Horizon. Andrew listened intently to the story, not realizing that the final boss had materialized behind him. All these quests now made sense. They were parts of a larger picture that led to the final test. But for now, that wasn't as important as facing off against a powerful warrior. The mutant attacked first. The young man tried his best to resist. He understood that this was the first time he had seen such a creature, so he needed more information. Andrew, jumping back, ordered the system to exchange less-needed materials for the wise man's eye. This allowed the student to see the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, this was not a very convenient thing to do, given the creature's aggressiveness. When it seemed that any action of the enemy could be calculated, he surprised. It was not only the multitude of hands armed with swords that had to be guarded against, and also giant limbs that tried to crush. With the help of the wise man's eye, the young man managed to learn everything he needed. The 5th sentinel of the horizon appeared before them. The ergosphere surprised the player more and more. Everything that happened in the digital world also mattered. Andrew soon learned that the enemy could spit flame. This became another obstacle on the path to victory. In addition to its extraordinary attack abilities, the monster also had unrivaled health, which were 3 times stronger than the strongest monster seen before, and the time left for liquidation was getting shorter and shorter. In order not to get nervous again, the hero decided to throw time restrictions out of his mind for now. He simply, without stopping for a second, carried out one combination of blows after another, calculating that if he maintains the pace and power of his strikes, he will be able to handle his opponent. After a few seconds, the young man managed to cut off several of the monster's limbs. It seemed like things were getting better with the quest. But this impression persisted until the moment when the hands were restored right before my eyes. Andrew could only continue his own pressure and ignore the circumstances. The unexpected flame from the monster's mouth forced the boy to retreat rapidly. Stone ruins formed between the opponents. Realizing that he needed to make up for lost time, the schoolboy decided to attack the sentry from above. He whirled around the mission boss like a whirlwind, and soon, having deprived his opponent of the opportunity to respond, he noticed that the monster's face was crumbling. This process testified to the fidelity of the chosen tactics. With the pressure on, Andrew seemed to have given it his all. The sentry was crumbling before our eyes, but he still hadn't been completely eliminated. Despite the efforts made and the correctly chosen strategy, time passed faster than the fulfillment of the conditions. The hero felt it himself. He didn't even need to look at the system notifications. For the first time, Corinne and Andrew were unable to complete the quest successfully. Watching the guard disappear into the digital code, the boy was lost in his guesses. Both students were unaware of the possible consequences in this case. Fearing some kind of punishment for such a result, the teammates unexpectedly received a notification. The system notified that due to the fulfillment of the conditions, more than half of the heroes will have a chance to play again in half a day. This time frame meant that the test would occur in the middle of the day. And fortunately, the game still offered choices for participants. Andrew didn't want history to repeat itself with mass casualties, so he always avoided quests during the day. And now he began to persuade Corin to do the same. Fortunately, the girl held the same beliefs as her friend. Therefore, after a short meeting, it was unanimously decided to refuse to take the test again. Although, based on the plot, receiving this award would greatly ease their situation. The school children could only rejoice that they had understood the logic of the ergosphere. The next morning began like every day of school for teenagers. Everyone hurried to school and conscientiously completed their teachers' assignments. Before class ended, Donna found her friend and asked about her plans for the evening. Corinne wasn't planning on doing anything special, so she didn't mind spending time together. So a conversation started between the girls about spending time together. Having arranged to meet after class, Dawn happily said goodbye to her friend. They hadn't spent time together in a long time, so to be honest, they were excited about the prospects. When the activities were over, Corinne took some time to chat with Andrew. They both shared the information they managed to dig up about the game's features overnight. The young man learned that Vaham, with his teleportation abilities, was fully correlated with the history of the ergosphere. His appearance in this form in the real world turned out to be logical. So all the strange mutated creatures, in one way or another, continued the game's storyline, and they fit perfectly into the concept of the Horizon. To learn more about this quest, you had to study the main storyline more carefully. But the problem was that there wasn't much information about it. The only thing that caught the young man's attention were the mentions of the local god, which was described as like a black hole in the sky. In the context of a conversation with the Rezon Guild, the hero suggested that this could be a portal to another universe. Players were increasingly inclined to believe that what was happening was related to mind games. During this conversation, Corinne didn't notice how quickly time flew by, and Donna was already starting to remind herself. Realizing that they needed to hurry, the girl and the boy hurried to the school exit. They concluded that they would not share what they learned with other members of the Alliance. But at some point I had to leave this topic for later. The system announced the start of an additional quest at the school in 5 minutes. The news threw my friends off guard, because they had definitely refused the same offer yesterday. But as it turned out, another player gave his consent for this, and now they have another chance to take part in this. The assistant could not provide more details without violating ergosphere rules. Therefore, the only way out was to agree, which is what Corinne did, because in the girls' opinion, only they already knew what they would be dealing with. At least the school children had a chance to complete this ordeal as quickly as possible with a minimum of casualties. Suspecting that the competitor might be a play killer, the guy wanted to deal with him as soon as possible. After consent, the system immediately transferred them to the starting point. Andrew, without even suspecting it, had encountered incredible bloodthirstiness. The villain who had just provoked the mass sacrifice was David. The two students, leaving the office, had no idea what awaited them. They were busy discussing their own affairs and plans after class. The dialogue was interrupted by an incomprehensible noise, the cause of which was not visible, although the sounds were nearby. When the tension dissipated a bit, and the friends decided to move on, the unexpected happened. One of the boys flew back as fast as if he had been hit by a train. The one who remained in place looked around in surprise, not understanding what had happened. It was too late to do anything, as it turned out my friend had died. Without realizing it, the young men came across one of the monsters, which of course they did not see. But they, on the contrary, attacked people as soon as they came into sight. The second guy was saved only by the appearance of Andrew. The hero quickly eliminated the danger. Realizing that this was only the first of many, the schoolboy ordered the rescued person to immediately leave the building. To be honest, the young man didn't know what to do. There were too many people in the school right now. Corinne's creativity came to the rescue, pulling the fire alarm. This was supposed to somehow make potential victims disappear from the horizon. When the girl and the boy were reunited, it was time to start searching for the remaining targets. Today Andrew didn't plan to separate. He thought his friend's help might be needed. About a minute later, another princess appeared ahead. The three candidates for elimination had not yet noticed their opponents when they attacked first. While Corinne was distracting herself, the hero quickly dealt with the enemies. But the joy of overcoming the equator in the struggle was overshadowed by yet another dead teenager. Even though Andrew wasn't the reason for starting the quest at school, he still felt guilty. There was no point in wandering through the corridors any further, because screams were definitely heard from the upper floor. Another student was in danger, surrounded by two monsters she couldn't see. Having lost a friend before, she knew perfectly well that she could be next. And indeed one of the monsters prepared to strike. Andrew, who arrived in time, was able to stop the attacker. Together with their partner, they trapped both cursed princes. And while they could not move, the schoolboy ordered the victim to run away. Due to her state of shock, the student did not even notice the appearance of the rescuer. Therefore, the guy had to scare her even more in order to get the desired result. When the monsters were finished, Andrew approached his girlfriend. He didn't understand why the beauty wasn't responding to his words, because time was running out. But the reason turned out to be significant. The body of a friend lay at the feet of a classmate. Donna, even though she wrote that she would be at the school entrance, still went inside. After performing an initial examination, the young man assured Corinne that the girl was still breathing. They had the time and opportunity to heal her. They just needed to separate. Despite the in-game penalties and additional quests, the young man stood by this decision. The most important thing for him was always the life of a person, especially an innocent victim. The guy ordered Corinne to stay here and deal with the evacuation and treatment of the wounded. Andrew himself had a little less than 8 minutes left to find the main boss and the smaller henchmen. It was necessary to urgently begin the search. As a farewell, the friend gave the guy the artifact she had managed to get last time. She had no use for him, but the young man might need him, especially now. The hero found the last ordinary cursed prince in the schoolyard. Now only the main task remained. The high school student met the guard in one of the offices on the first floor. The abnormal monster had completely transformed and was awaiting its opponent. The guy didn't need to be persuaded twice, and in a moment he was already flying at the monster. A fierce fight ensued. The difference from the previous one was that Andrew understood perfectly well how to act. The guy, like lightning, rushed around the enemy using enhanced skills, due to which the sentry began to collapse much faster than the previous time. Of course, the monster didn't like it, so he tried to resist. Retreating in a confined space was not easy. Fragments of walls and furniture flew towards the young man, scattering in all directions. After the boy lost his pace, the monster took over the initiative in the fight. Thanks to the system, Andrew knew he had 30 seconds left until the final. Therefore, it was immediately necessary to turn the tide of the battle. Thanks to the passive damage absorption skill and the injury he received, the guy gained some advantage. He augmented his own achievement with an artifact he received from Corinne. This little thing increased the damage level to the enemy by as much as 5 times. Andrew had a chance to complete the quest with one blow. In the final seconds that were still ticking away, the high school student rushed towards the monster. This time he wasn't going to just accept his fate either. The guard prepared to counterattack, but Andrew proved to be more agile. Maneuvering, the young man managed to cut the monster in half. He himself didn't understand how it happened, but the primary conditions of the additional quest had been met. But that was far from the end, because the boy was immediately attacked again. Not expecting such a cunning move, Andrew managed to regroup and jump back to a safe distance. He couldn't believe his eyes. David himself was standing right in front of him. It turned out that it was the villain who was responsible for the deaths of many people in this building, and now the hooligan wanted to get rid of his main opponent. The day before, David could not have guessed what could await him. He remembered lying on the floor of the tower, catching his breath after a fierce fight. And Eugene, unexpectedly appearing nearby, congratulated him on becoming the youngest play killer. The boy remembered how angry he had become then, believing that he was being mocked. The interlocutor was not afraid of his threats. On the contrary, he began to eagerly explain the peculiarities of awakening. In the Chaos Guild, this process was called translation, a kind of reassembly of the constructor. Of course, at that time the rich man did not understand what was going on at all. He was far from scientific terminology. Therefore, Eugene simply called the game a transition to another universe. Then the high school student thought that a crazy stalker was simply mocking him. He didn't want to continue the conversation any longer and prepared to go offline. But he didn't have time to do this because Eugene's hand suddenly pierced his torso through and through. Such actions caused a collapse that progressed too quickly. There was no time left for anger, especially after the interlocutor's words about the very possibility of death. Screaming, like all the players before him, the young man experienced a terrible transformation. It was successful, and David found himself in his own living room, sweating with terror. Perhaps because of the rage that filled him. This experience was not only frightening, but also painful. My heart was pounding like crazy. But the schoolboy came to his senses immediately when he saw that he was not alone in the room. The stranger asked how he was doing without even bothering to identify himself. It turns out that the leader of Chaos was one of the 5 founders of the ergosphere. After their private conversation, much became clearer to the young man. And now David could actually get rid of the person who dared to oppose his authority. Today they were absolutely on par with Andrew. Not even that. The hooligan thought he was in much better shape. Now the common story of 2 former friends was about to end. And the exceptional uniqueness of the Major is confirmed. Unlike the villain, the hero was concerned that people had died because of the quest at the school. He couldn't forgive his classmate for such a horrible act. It was on a whole other level. More than simple sadism towards him personally. Andrew lost control of himself and used his most powerful skill against his opponent. He could only think about revenge and punishment for what he had done. Especially because of what he saw before him, David did not at all reproach himself for his own decision. The hero attacked with the desire to destroy the freak once and for all. And although the bully considered himself strong, he did not expect such power from his opponent. With a few swings of his sword, Andrew knocked his classmate off balance. The rich man gritted his teeth when he felt the first wounds on his body. The guy didn't plan on experiencing another humiliation, so he activated his Dragon Slayer skill. This time, Andrew felt the power of the Play Killer. But this did not stop the hero. Despite the pain, he struck another blow with his sword into the villain's chest. David screamed in pain. There was still time before destruction. Therefore, the young man activated the guillotine skill to save his own skin. The monster behind him rushed to protect his master, and Andrew had to retreat. After several exchanges of blows, the guy made a maneuver. Once behind the monster, he attacked it from behind. To do this, the young man used a skill that converts anger into energy. Believing that his classmate was focused on another fight, David decided to attack insidiously. The guy fired an arrow from his crossbow at Andrew, but he easily repelled the attack. A moment later, the hero's foot hit the rich man in the face. In the opinion of the high school student, such a useless person did not deserve adequate treatment. He was a monster in human form and could no longer continue his existence. Therefore, without a single drop of regret, Andrew decided to end their story now and forever. He struck David with his sword, cutting his chest in half. The guy closed his eyes, so he didn't immediately realize that a trick had been played on him. Instead of an opponent, a skeleton flew in front of him. This was a consequence of the necromancer's intervention, so the young man turned around. He was not mistaken. A familiar girl was already standing nearby. She was guarding the body of an unconscious classmate. This could only mean one thing. David had joined the Chaos Guild. The rage that had built up during this fight seemed to have spread to the others. The guy wanted revenge, and as if sensing this pull, Corinne came to Andrew's aid. The wicked necromancer escaped the trap of the labyrinthine mistress. She considered herself invincible, but the girl was not going to give up so easily. Using the Minotaur skill, she quickly found herself behind her opponent. In the necromancer's eyes, one could already read the approach of death. A powerful blow threw the supporter of evil back several meters. At first, it was impossible to understand what was happening in the glare of the attack. But it soon became apparent that the scoundrel had managed to protect herself. She started to flaunt her protective barrier, but the smile disappeared from her face the next moment. Because Corinne broke all obstacles on the way to her victim, the necromancer had to use another skill to save herself. The field of corpses was supposed to separate the 2 girls from potential help in the form of Andrew, but if that was all there was to it, she could be said goodbye. Because the young man, in a moment, having overcome the thorny path, came to the aid of his friend. The scoundrel realized that it would be difficult to deal with such opponents alone. She found the barrier of corpses almost impenetrable, but because of its arrogance, it found itself on the verge of destruction. Corinne had to make the final blow, and she did it brilliantly. The supporter of evil screamed in pain, feeling the life leaving her body. Suddenly, the fight was interrupted by a system notification. The assistant announced that the quest participants had been moved to another location. Only the game's intervention saved the necromancer's life. She was sincerely happy about this circumstance, despite the opponents standing nearby. But the angry Andrew didn't understand why he was deprived of the opportunity for vendetta. The point was precisely that the young man and the girl had to compete with the other participants in the test. Dissolving into thin air, the supporter of evil promised to destroy her enemies at the next meeting. But this made no impression on the young man because he understood perfectly well that everything would happen just the opposite. Hearing this in response, the necromancer began to make excuses for her mistake. She believed that her opponents were just lucky, and that next time they would feel all her wrath. Having ended the conversation on this note, the friends found themselves in the school corridor from which the game was taking them. Once safe, the girl immediately examined her friend, noting that he was injured. But there was no time for chatter because a rescue operation was already underway on the street. The boy and girl needed to run away immediately to avoid trouble. They left using one of the additional exits, avoiding unnecessary eyes. Both students felt bad about what had happened, but it was still necessary to return home, because my relatives probably couldn't find a place for themselves. Even Corinne got a call from a housewife, which indicated that the news had spread to the media. As the friend reported, she managed to cure Donna, and the girl left the victim in a safe place. After the party members said their goodbyes, it was time for Andrew to focus on his own healing. The guy used one of the purchased sledges for this. He was surprised that his phone was silent, but everything became clear when pieces of equipment fell out of his pocket. All that remained was to get home and get a beating. Meanwhile, in the lair of chaos, the necromancer and the butcher waited for David to awaken. They didn't understand how the strongest young man among them could screw up like that. Gradually, the dialogue turned into an argument and a search for who was the most shameful player. This hurt the necromancer's pride even more, and she jumped up, ready for battle. The fight almost happened, but at the right moment, Eugene entered the room. He didn't want to see this in the living room. This man was an absolute authority among the clan members. Therefore, those present immediately calmed down. From today, the scout was relieved of his duties of finding new players for transfer. Therefore, he planned to spend more time in the world of living people. Eugene was also upset by the results of David's first fight. It turned out that the Labyrinth Master and the Avenger are much more experienced and stronger than previously thought. The new representative of the Playkillers was given complete carte blanche to retaliate against his old enemy. But most likely without Eugene's personal intervention, those two will become a significant obstacle to the boss's plans. The fate of the Horizon has already been decided, and no dangerous factors should have emerged from anywhere. Eugene's status allowed the man to intervene in the course of events on his own. He was among the top 5 players in the ergosphere and did not need any counseling or supervision. Suspecting nothing, Andrew, meanwhile, was heading home. Megan was waiting for her brother in the hallway outside the apartment. The woman couldn't find a place for herself. For a long time, she couldn't reach the guy on the phone and was building horrible pictures in her imagination. Suddenly, the young man's familiar voice finally made me look away from the phone screen. Megan immediately rushed to find out the circumstances of Andrew's absence. In order not to hurt his sister, the guy first decided to make up some kind of story. He even asked in surprise what had happened, as if he knew nothing at all. The woman said that there was an explosion at the boys' school, which took the lives of students and left many injured. Almost the entire building was destroyed for reasons that are still unknown. While Andrew was looking at the horrific footage, Megan was looking at him. She saw that her brother's clothes were torn in several places and stained with blood. This was a signal that everything secret was now to become apparent. Any outside excuses raised even more questions. So Andrew decided to honestly admit his own lie. And although the young man assured that everything was fine with him, the nurse had her own vision of the matter. The nurse began to insist on an immediate examination at the hospital. She didn't want to hear any excuses about this, and, to confirm her own words, she started calling doctors she knew to arrange an appointment, since after what happened, the school was unsuitable for teaching for some time. The guy had a few free days. He should have taken more responsibility for his own health. This was finally ingrained in Andrew's mind when Megan began to cry on his shoulder. She only did it once when their parents died. The next morning, as soon as he woke up, the young man immediately went to the hospital. He didn't know what to expect and was afraid of the diagnosis. The guy suspected that due to the transformation, the properties of his body might have changed. And he even jumped up in his chair when the nurse called him to the specialist's office. But when Andrew crossed the threshold of the treatment room, his heart immediately skipped a few beats. A young doctor was sitting at the table. He smiled happily, watching the patient's reaction as if he knew something. For some reason, the schoolboy began to worry even more about this. An awkward silence fell in the office. Realizing that the young man still didn't recognize him, the man decided to be the first to start the conversation. As it turned out, he was Megan's friend. She introduced the interlocutors last Christmas. It was an unplanned meeting. My sister just got drunk and a colleague brought her home. When Andrew remembered those events, he relaxed a little. The doctor's name was Clay, and strangely enough, this name stuck in the schoolboy's memory. And the specialist himself immediately recognized the boy, despite the striking physical changes. The time for politeness was over, and Megan's friend revealed the hero's test results. Andrew leaned forward with his whole body to understand the doctor's nonverbal signals of concern. After a brief study of the documentation, Clay announced that everything was generally fine. But, in his opinion, the guy's performance was the most ideal during the entire practice. The specialist saw this for the first time. No deviations from the norm, not even by 1/10. Andrew's results were even better than those of professional athletes. And although the hero was glad that nothing supernatural was found, he still felt like a fake. It wasn't just physical health that worried Clay. From the news, the man knew perfectly well what had happened at school the day before. And even though he wasn't qualified as a psychologist, he was concerned about Andrew's feelings. After a short silence, the young man replied that he was incredibly crushed and angry. He took responsibility for all the victims upon himself. Clay, of course, understood the motives behind such emotional swings, but he hastened to assure the patient that it was simply survivor's guilt. There was no need to get too deep into this loop, because the fates of others could not depend on the student. Moreover, in that difficult moment, Andrew most likely gave it his all because he had a big heart. Therefore, the best thing the guy could do today was to forgive himself and let go of the situation. Listening to the words of the interlocutor, the hero gradually felt that they were, as it were, healing him from the inside. At the end of the conversation, the man unexpectedly decided to ask about something personal. Megan told him that Andrew liked to play Ergosphere, and Clay wouldn't mind having the young man keep him company, because I sometimes like to spend time online in the evenings. The hero promised to do a joint session and stay in touch through his sister. The mystery of the Ergosphere made the boy a little nervous. He didn't expect Megan to talk so much about her brother to outsiders. Suddenly, the schoolboy looked at the situation from a different angle, and it struck him. For Megan, Clay could not be a stranger. There could be a relationship between them. Terrible thoughts about my own future were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Corinne was in touch, requesting an immediate meeting. When Andrew arrived at the scene, the girl was already waiting for him. It turned out that the Rezon Guild demanded a meeting, and the beauty herself wanted to see him. She, like her classmate, was deeply troubled by what had happened, so I needed to speak up. Hugging her friend from behind, she wanted to feel at least a little sympathy from those around her. The girl almost lost a close friend while completing the quest, and this circumstance, against the background of many deaths, somehow dissolved in Andrew's mind. Now the young man felt the full gravity of the situation, especially when Corinne began to scold herself for being selfish. She couldn't forgive herself for that moment of doubt over Donna's body. Andrew couldn't let his girlfriend destroy herself, so he decided to do what Clay had done to him before. He understood that all the doubts were caused only by completing the quest and protecting his partner. There was no question of cold-heartedness or selfishness in this situation at all. Hugging the girl, the young man reminded her that, in conclusion, she had spent her energy on treating her friend. In the end, Andrew's words touched Corinne's heart, and she momentarily forgot about her mask of pride. But quickly regaining consciousness, she immediately began to flog. Having agreed on moral compensation with strawberry milk, the friends set off for the meeting. Kelly was already waiting for them at Rezon's base. The woman greeted them politely and announced that they would raid the Chaos Guild at night. Thanks to the attack on the school, Andrew and Corinne were able to quickly figure out where their base was. It was easy to follow those who were focused on other things. In Kelly's opinion, there was no time to waste, so she had a proposal for the alliance partners. She suggested attacking the enemies together to take revenge. What happened at the school the day before, the mass casualties, should not have gone unpunished. The woman offered this opportunity to school children only as a goodwill gesture. She didn't want to make them killers. She just left the choice up to the young players. Almost without thinking about the offer, Andrew immediately agreed. He wanted to deal with David, and this time make it permanent. He chose an opponent and wanted no one to touch the scoundrel. Kelly agreed to this condition without any problems. But Corinne, unlike her friend, didn't know exactly what to do, because at that very moment their party received a notification from the system. The game required completing a punishment quest tonight, which coincided with the raid, and they could not refuse this condition. It is quite understandable that Andrew could not understand the reasons for such strict requirements, because until the very end, Corinne didn't want to tell how many people she actually helped. In the end, the stalemate accumulated more than 1,000 penalty points that needed to be worked out. If they avoid completing the quest, they will have to give up everything they have gained through collective work. Although the boy was in pain, he understood that revenge would have to be postponed. He couldn't be angry with his friend because she was saving innocent lives in this way. If he were Corin, he would have done the same, but the Ergosphere did not operate with the qualities of humanity. Kelly, who observed the conversation, was struck by the purity of the students' souls. She said she was ready to help with the debt but didn't see the need for it. Because in the woman's opinion, the young man and the girl would be better off completing a quest right now, not raiding. Kelly promised to deal with chaos on her own and avenge the lives of the school children. The job was done and the responsibilities were divided. All that remained was to begin the preparations. In parting, guild leader Rezin wished the interlocutors success. Unexpectedly, Corin liked this decision of her cunning competitor. The girl even felt warm feelings for the woman. Returning home from the base, the schoolchildren decided to check their inventory. Because of the crazy whirlwind of events, they never had time to do it. They expected to receive some artifacts for their efforts. And indeed, among the already known things, something interesting appeared. Corinne received a bell to summon Argus's student, and Andrew is the key to the noon room. Both items were something new in the gaming world and did not differ in specific signatures. The only way to check what these things were was to activate them. The guy agreed to use the key first. As soon as the artifact was in his hand, something resembling an energy castle formed in the air. Having touched the seal, the friends instantly found themselves in another place. It was a space decorated in a classical style. It turned out that the south room was Andrew's personal silk, which he could use at his own discretion, as well as bring friends here. A kind of recreation room that could be used as a training base or warehouse. It was truly impressive in its scale. The school children had no idea how they ended up here, but it seemed like it was some kind of parallel universe. After all, there was no need to delve into the origins of the game today. Corin was eager to learn about the properties of his subject as soon as possible. The bell could only be used twice. The disciple of the great sage Argus could answer questions about the nuances of the game. The girl ordered the system to activate the bell without even consulting Andrew. She wanted to take advantage of this opportunity, despite the young man's objections. Because for her, the key questions that needed to be answered were obvious. When the bell rang, a bright glow filled the room. A girl materialized in the air, who was difficult to distinguish from a real person. Opening her eyes, the Argus student introduced herself and announced her readiness to answer questions. First, Corinne decided to play a little prank, which almost caused a heart attack in the guy standing nearby. But in the end, the beauty asked a question about information about Horizon. The student replied that she was only familiar with the prophecies associated with this word. According to Argus, the Forbidden Gate opened when 6 columns fell, and all the enlightened will have to travel to the lands of the Citadel, whatever that means. All players had to fight under any circumstances to finish some incomprehensible feast. To the young man at that moment, everything said seemed like gibberish. While the school children were dealing with their new toys, the Rezon Guild was preparing for an attack. They were waiting for the right moment to attack the Chaos Guard, who was not particularly vigilant. The first attack went smoothly. Having neutralized his opponent, the scout reported to Kelly that the path was clear. The woman was already ready and waiting for the man to open the portal. Thanks to the assassin's secret passage, the leader of Rezona penetrated the lair of chaos. The teleportation worked almost instantly, but as it turned out, the subordinate did not take care of all the guards. It didn't matter, in the woman's opinion. She could handle the bad players herself. Thanks to the skill of the Queen's Guard, she gracefully passed by the scoundrels who were scattering in all directions. When there were no enemies left outside, the comrades decided to find the leader. As they entered the middle, they almost immediately saw a man standing in the shadows on the other side of the hall. He showed with his whole appearance that he was expecting their arrival. Kelly had no doubt that an ambush might be waiting for them, and apparently it was. But the woman didn't care. Her goal had to be realized today. The scoundrel, smiling mysteriously, let his interlocutor understand that he knew her personality well. And although it was an unpleasant surprise for her, the stranger was not supposed to understand this. Having learned about the murderous purpose of the arrival of the opponents, the head of Chaos inquired about the reasons for such a decision. Kelly, without hiding anything, named her completely practical goals for the future. Unexpectedly, the opponent offered an agreement. He could compensate for the monetary reward for Horizon. But instead, he wanted the Rezon Guild to simply withdraw from the competition. The woman greeted this offer with a smile, of course. The scoundrel could only expect a refusal. She was a player and didn't want to resort to any tricks to achieve her goal. And I was sure that the team members had the same opinion about Ergosphere. Hearing the answer, the head of the Chaos Guild decided to get down to business. With a snap of his fingers, he skillfully removed the camouflage from the playkillers in the room. There were too many opponents, and to buy time for reinforcements, Kelly decided to take everyone on herself. The assistant was supposed to teleport the rest of the team here. The woman agreed to hold out as long as necessary while the order was carried out. She rushed into the fight before her opponents had time to understand anything. Using the skill of the Queen's Garden, Kelly captured everyone who separated her from the main character. The supporters of darkness were unable to move. The advantage of the forces of evil was leveled in a matter of seconds. Guild leader Rezon fought like a lioness. Even the necromancer, with her cunning, could do nothing against such an opponent. She tried to attack Kelly from behind, but it turned out to be too slow for that. All the bone spikes missed and sank into the floor. Halfway to the enemy boss, the woman encountered a new obstacle. Eugene, having become an obstacle to advancement, treated Kelly as if they were old acquaintances. The man even remembered that they had once fought among themselves. But she didn't care. The warrior didn't want to talk. She wanted to deal with her enemies. The scoundrel turned out to be extremely cunning. Realizing that he might not win in a fair duel, he resorted to a trick. Having deprived his opponent of all his skills for 5 minutes, he gave his henchman an advantage. Although it was an unpleasant experience and complicated the process of fighting, Kelly was not going to give up for the sake of her people, and Leo showed that they were not going to give up for her. The spiritual warrior appeared unexpectedly, interrupting the attack of his opponents. This indicated that the scout had fulfilled his part of the agreement. The entire Reason Guild was awaiting orders from their commander. But Kelly wasn't going to put her comrades in any kind of framework, leaving the introduction of the battle to their discretion. For her, the main thing remained achieving the goal by any means. Eugene, realizing that the situation had now become complicated, approached the boss. But he didn't want to enter into a direct confrontation. He was interested in observing. The man entrusted everything to the discretion of his subordinate, who happily went to carry out the order. The forces were almost equal, and the risk existed. But curiosity and excitement were stronger than the feeling of self-preservation. While the confrontation was gaining momentum at the Chaos Guild base, Andrew and Corinne began their penalty test. A young man and a girl teleported to the football field on the university campus. They were pleased, at least because it was night and there was no one around. But since students enjoyed evening adventures, there was still a risk of innocent victims. The young man unexpectedly spoke about the predictions of Argus's student. Now it seemed to him that Horizon would not happen on a specific date, but when the players fulfilled all the conditions. Because it was the talk about the 6 columns that stuck in his memory and wouldn't let go. It only remained to find out what exactly was meant allegorically. The discussion, as usual, was interrupted by a notification from the system. It was about taming a monster, but with the participation of other players. And in principle, it didn't matter who killed the monster, because the result was shared among all participants. And if the young man and the girl weren't so responsible, they could have continued their rest in peace in the noon room. But responsibility for the lives of other people did not allow the students to relax. They carefully prepared for the start of the battle, gathering an arsenal. But they hoped to meet their recent acquaintances who helped in the work with the wolf. The system announced the start of the quest, and the friends tensed up. There was complete silence around, and no one was visible on the horizon. It seemed that even the monsters didn't come to this test. After standing still for a while and listening to their surroundings, the students decided to move towards the building. Suddenly, Corinne stopped and activated her weapon. The girl heard someone running in their direction. And soon Andrew also felt the approach of a living being. It was impossible to predict who exactly it would be, enemy or friend, so all that remained was to wait. After a few seconds, a silhouette of a person appeared on the path. It could be either a simple player or a play killer, so the friends prepared for battle. As he got closer, the stranger began to beg for help. At first glance, he was just a young man who found himself in a tough situation. Flooded with tears and barely able to catch his breath, the blonde didn't even expect such a meeting. In front of him stood real players. Forgetting his own safety, he rushed towards them, pleading even more for protection. The friends looked at each other. The situation seemed suspicious. So Corinne decided to start by threatening the newcomer. The young man did not expect such an attack and froze in place in fear. Andrew noticed that the stranger looked like a play killer who pretends to be and attacks by surprise. Therefore, to begin with, the blonde was asked to show the weapon in order to understand the class. Unexpectedly, the guy immediately agreed to the conditions. He took out his sword in a second. It turned out to be the weapon of an ordinary adventurer. But this was absolutely impossible. According to data from the Reason Guild, there were no such players of the rank. The interlocutor introduced himself as Ethan and told his new acquaintances that he was playing only for the sake of the plot. He didn't care about his rank and character development. But still, in an inexplicable way, he reincarnated into real life. Confused, Andrew and Corinne lowered their weapons, wanting to find out a few more details. But the young man began to shout that monsters were chasing him, and there was no time for chatter. And indeed, the monster was already flying towards the players. It was a strange-looking creature, which made it seem like an even more formidable opponent. Andrew, without thinking for a long time, entered into a duel with him. He had never seen such creatures before today, but it wasn't the first time. Corinne tried to come to the boy's aid and trap the monster, but it was all in vain. The villain turned out to be more clever than the girl. Andrew realized that he needed to work up a sweat to defeat this agile monster. But there was no choice. The hero just had to navigate right now during the battle. The young man tried to orient himself and calculate the trajectory of his opponent's limbs. What was extremely difficult was that they were more flexible due to multiple joints on one arm. Ethan came to the rescue. He pointed out a weak spot in the area of the enemy's right side. The desired point was marked with a scar. Thanks to Corinne's reinforcement, Andrew gained more attack power, and in a moment he rushed forward, trying to test the theory of his new acquaintance. The sword went in exactly where Ethan pointed. The monster immediately lost coordination and fell to the ground. Shocked, the comrades opened their mouths in surprise. But there was no room for delay, so the girl decided to join the game. She used a magical beast containment trap against the unknown creature. This time the idea worked perfectly. After killing the creature, a new question arose. Was he alone? Ethan knew the answer. He immediately reported that there could be several such monsters. He even knew what they were called, the guards of the closed castle in the north. Although the guy, like his new acquaintances, had never seen these creatures in person before. He had heard the story itself, one might say the legend, about the Count with a broken heart. His own nephews betrayed him, and because of this the man closed his fortress, posting guards. These guards protected the master at the cost of their own lives. While wandering through the dungeons of one of the Ergosphere quests, Ethan came across an image of such a monster. It turns out that thanks to their punishment, Andrew and Corinne stumbled upon a walking treasure trove of knowledge. This young man knew about 100% of all the legends of the monster world. Such stories interested him more than battles and treasure hunting. He immersed himself in myths, as if in a separate universe, which helped distract him from real life. And it turned out to be a good chance for friends to learn more about what interests them. Having transformed into his own character in real life, Ethan really didn't know what to do. He was afraid to engage in direct confrontations with monsters. And now I got into this quest by accident due to the system's penalties. If it weren't for meeting Andrew and Corinne, the young man probably wouldn't be alive anymore. The hero agreed to help the boy pass the test. But instead, I wanted to get information about a quest called Horizon. It turned out that there was some information about the final competition in Itan, associated with rituals and sanctuaries. He happily agreed to tell everything he knew once he was safe. The arrangement was fully agreed upon between the two parties. The players exchanged contacts. It is time to complete the punishment. Thanks to the adventurer's skill, the company decided to quickly find opponents. The boy's sword could roughly indicate the direction in which to move. The path ran behind the main campus building. When the players arrived at the location, it turned out that there were two monsters there at once. Ethan began to apologize for his short-sightedness, believing that now everyone was in danger. For him, even one monster was an insurmountable obstacle. But Andrew reassured his friend, now they were in a different position because they knew the monster's weak points. The hero calmly moved forward, ordering Corin to cover the rear. He was confident that now the confrontation, even against two opponents, would be short. In front of a shocked Ethan, the schoolboy rushed into the attack. The blonde couldn't believe his eyes. The new acquaintance adapted to difficult conditions as quickly as anyone before. The adventurer began to think that this might be the person who could change everything. One of the opponents received a fatal blow in the first seconds, but the second immediately rushed to the defense. Andrew turned out to be much more agile this time and managed to avoid a collision. While the monsters were distracted by one person, the young man's partner joined the game. The girl set a trap for one of the enemies, and he stood there in confusion, unable to move. When nevertheless the monster came to his senses and tried to escape, the hero appeared nearby and stopped him halfway. Thanks to his Avenger skills, he dealt with his opponent in a matter of seconds. Covering her comrade's back, Corinne took care of the second monster, which was about to attack insidiously. The training was finally over. Ethan could only watch with admiration the work of his new acquaintances. They could be an adventurer's chance to stop the inevitable. It was only necessary to find out the motivation of the young man and the girl. They happily said that what worries them the most while completing quests is the lives of ordinary people. The students set themselves the main task of neutralizing monsters that could destroy the world. These explanations finally destroyed the adventurer's concerns about his future. The system announced the victory and offered to choose awards. It was a pointless activity considering the fines, so Corinne asked to teleport everyone home. 60 seconds left until goodbye, and the comrades reminded him of Ethan's promise. Initially, the young man wanted to send a voice file with information, but Andrew insisted on a personal meeting. The hero had a desire to ask questions that concerned him during the process. Frightened by such pressure, the adventurer agreed to the request. According to him, time could be found for this. Dissolving into digital streams, the trio agreed to meet tomorrow. After teleporting, Ethan found himself in his living room. He could barely breathe from excitement. Andrew and Corinne could be his chance. There wasn't much time left to carry out the plan he had been considering for a long time. The guy has a wonderful mind, but he can't do it alone. The lock key had to be entrusted to the hands of a skilled player who was not afraid to risk his life. The Reason Guild was still fighting fiercely at the Chaos base. Daisy was the first to gain the advantage. Using her skill, she pinned the Butcher. He froze in place in shock, predicting his death. In the heat of battle, the girl lost her vigilance and failed to notice the enemy from behind. The minion of Chaos attacked Daisy with a triple attack, increasing the distance with the victim. But she didn't have time to finish the job because Leo came to her friend's aid. With a lightning-fast counterattack, the man threw the scoundrel several meters away from him. A necromancer stood up for the woman, but the attack was immediately eliminated by another member of the Reason Guild. Thanks to the strength, determination, and skill of the two guilds, the battle scene changed every second. Players used a variety of tricks and gimmicks to gain a strategic advantage. As a result of one of the counterattacks, a powerful explosion occurred. Daisy got a little carried away in the process, but the healer immediately came to the rescue. Although Ben did not directly intervene in the confrontation, almost instantly he was ready to help anyone who needed it. Finding herself nearby with the monk at about the same time, Kelly decided to complete the mission. The man suggested dealing with each antagonist separately, but according to the leader, the main target remained the Chaos boss. She suggested throwing all her strength into the fight against it, and finally, cutting off the Hydra's head. The leader of the opponents had the class of an emperor, as far as the woman could see. This, of course, raised some concerns, but it was necessary to take risks to get a decent result. Only the effect of surprise could help with this, and Ben, on whom all the group's hopes rested, had to maintain their health. Using one of her skills, Kelly began to rapidly advance forward, pushing back enemies. The woman saw no one except the main target in front of her. Eugene, understanding the opponent's plan, immediately approached the leader. He was worried about the outcome of the confrontation and suggested escaping via teleport. But the boss rejected the offer despite the danger. He had an ace up his sleeve, which the Emperor preferred not to talk about. As all the members of the Reason Guild rushed forward, the healer found himself defenseless behind. He supported his comrades, focusing only on their safety. Therefore, I did not immediately notice the appearance of the Grim Reaper behind me. Colin attacked insidiously from behind. Ben received a serious injury, which fortunately was not fatal. Hearing their comrades scream, the team members looked around and the attack was delayed. Kelly needed to make an urgent decision. First, the woman activated a healing doll for Ben, which was supposed to support his vital signs. But the Black Reaper was not going to stop there. He wanted to finish off his victim with a devastating death skill. But after receiving a little healing, the healer used a defense skill that negated any damage. He couldn't let the scoundrel kill himself, because he understood his important role in the mission, especially at this moment. Kelly, meanwhile, ordered the team to split up. They had no other choice. The comrades had to protect the only healer in this room at all costs. Despite the environment, which most likely threatened the group, the woman took this step. She took all responsibility upon herself. Ultimately, among the allies present, Kelly was the strongest. Such determination won over the Emperor, although he hoped for the retreat of his opponents. The division of Reason into two groups could also be turned to one's advantage, and Eugene wanted to take advantage of that. He ordered his henchmen to attack only Kelly, which, if successful, would decapitate his competitors. The rest of the soldiers, in the man's opinion, were not worthy of such attention. The Dragon Hunter was next to his opponent in an instant. He immediately showed the scoundrel that they were worth considering. The rare class of the opponent made Eugene pause for a moment and note it with admiration. During this pause, the emperor decided to intervene, realizing that the matter could drag on. He activated his audience skill. Everyone except his henchman immediately fell to the ground, unable to move. For the first time, Kelly felt such a power unfamiliar to her until today. Now the entire Razan guild was under threat of destruction. Eugene, realizing that the enemy was unable to resist, immediately took advantage of this. He kicked the dragon hunter in the face and he fell to the floor. After what was done, the henchman of evil gave the order to eliminate Kelly. Everyone nearby rushed at the woman, ready to destroy her. The room was illuminated by a bright light that completely obscured the victim of the attack. The members of Razan could not help but cry out in regret over the possible death of their leader. But everything turned out not as they imagined. With the help of the monk's skill, who was nearby, Kelly was not injured. A blessing descended upon the woman that completely nullified all harm. From now on, the emperor's skill had no effect on her. The warrior rose to her feet in all her strength and beauty. From now on, with increased strength and agility and reduced damage, she was almost invincible. Guild leader Rezan rushed forward. Opponents could no longer stop her, no matter how strong they considered themselves. Next up was the emperor's head, but Eugene got in the way. The man naively believed that this time he would be able to cope with his opponent. Having cast the mirror damage skill on the woman, the scoundrel decided that he had won. But now all his efforts were in vain. Having flown past the trickster like a fury, Kelly could now focus only on the main thing. The emperor was already near her. She saw that the boss was about to use one of his devastating skills. There were only a few milliseconds left before the counterattack, which guild leader Rezan took full advantage of. When the emperor's head separated from his body, his comrades sighed with relief. But it turned out that it was also a trick. There was a doll in front of them, and the puppeteer was somewhere nearby out of reach of the swords. It really was on the roof of the building. The assistant informed the boss that the puppet had been destroyed. But it wasn't necessary to do so, because the director could feel them perfectly well himself. Thanks to his skills, he controlled his puppets like pets. Further resistance was disadvantageous to the Chaos Guild. The man ordered his subordinates to retreat. He gathered all the necessary information for further fighting. The first personal meeting turned out to be surprisingly productive. And for the second time, the boss wanted to meet with his opponents in person, without hiding behind masks. Since Andrew had nothing to do due to the forced weekend, the guy decided to take care of his sister. He had already started cooking early, although according to her it was not necessary. The young man enjoyed taking care of the elder, although she was always against it. The woman wanted her brother to spend more time in leisure activities typical of teenagers. Gathering at the store, she went back in time on the way, wondering what it was like. Now the life of a schoolboy seemed a little sad. He was in a hurry to be an adult. Lost in her own thoughts, Megan unexpectedly ran into a stranger near her apartment. The girl seemed to be waiting for someone. In the conversation that ensued between them, it became clear that this was Andrew's girlfriend. And so the most important women in the hero's life met. One of them immediately liked them, although they didn't want to show it. Megan remembered how her brother had been upset when it turned out that someone had been staying at their house. Now, observing the beauty of her new acquaintance, she understood the reason. Suddenly smiling, the woman realized that the life of a schoolboy was not as hopeless as it seemed. She invited the guest into the house. Andrew, who had not expected Corinne to arrive, froze in place. Now he predicted long and uncomfortable conversations about his personal life. And he wasn't wrong, because that was the first sentence Megan said.